What's up, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the sure-to-be amazing World of Warcraft Classic. Today, we have more of that Countdown to Classic variety for you. A smorgasbord of classic content as we chat at length about warriors, databases and itemization, and content creators. After that, I'll come at you with the latest patron-selected content, being a trip to the forums on dishonourable kills. And then we'll get through a favourite segment, Memory Lane. You all know the drill by now. This is a community-based podcast, so if you like what you're hearing, join the Discord and keep the conversations going with us all. Follow the show on social media and write into me if you'd like to call into the show, contribute, or just say hi. Everything you'll need is in the show notes for each episode. Now, let's get into it with Calling Countdown. All right, we've got more Countdown to Classic listeners on the line in another big group chat, and this is one that a lot of people have been waiting some time for because we're talking everything and anything warriors, one of the more popular classes, I think it's safe to say, within classic World of Warcraft. Now, on the line, we've got some old favorites. Why don't I start with our man up in the Great White North, Neil. How are you, mate?
Hey, what's up, everybody?
And with him, if you have listened to previous Countdown to Classic episodes, and specifically the one I did just before I went away to BlizzCon, you'll notice that there was a bit of a bonding recently on the show, and a bit of a bromance commenced between Neil and this next listener, and that's Viv. Viv, how are you, mate?
Feeling fantastic.
Excellent. I look forward to you and Neil getting stuck into a few of these topics later on as you sort of stoke the fires of that warrior bromance a little bit further. And then adding into the mix a Countdown to Classic first-timer, someone I've been liaising with for some time now who I've been dying to get on the show, and I'm so glad to finally have them here. Dokken, how are you, mate?
I'm doing fantastic, my friend. Glad to be here, and this is going to be great.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being on the show. Now, guys, look, let's get straight into it. I'm not going to beat around the bush too much with this one. Neil, Viv, the guys know you. Dokken, or I'm just going to sum it up for you, mate. Basically, you are a warrior extraordinaire. You've got a boatload of experience with the class. You've told me that you are mainly an expert in the protection spec, but obviously happy to talk about a little bit of everything. However, I'll give you one quick chance. Please, by all means, do let people know where they can find you. You're a streamer as well, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I do my streams primarily on YouTube. That's Dokken_TBO. You can find me on there. And I do have a Twitch channel. I tell people to follow me on both. I may be switching to that in the future, but for now, I'm primarily on YouTube.
Too easy. Thanks so much for that, mate. And what we'll do is, like I said, let's just kick off. And boys, this is a question that, you know, any one of you would be more than qualified to answer. It's let's call this, you know, we play the game where you pick how many jelly beans are in a jar and closest to the pin and whatnot. So here's your opener on Warriors with World of Warcraft Classic. Like I alluded to, this is obviously a class that's exceptionally popular. There are the proverbial metric fuck ton of people that want to be a warrior when Classic comes around. So I'll start with you, Neil. Realistically, what percentage of the player base are you expecting to roll warrior, given that we have got so many years of theory crafting and knowledge behind us now, well, at least amongst the hardcore players, that the warriors are perhaps the kings of DPS, the kings of tanking, and basically just a pretty sturdy class. What do you think we'll see? 15%? More? What are you guessing at?
Pretty sure we're going to see something like between 18 and 25%, I think.
Wow.
It's going to be, it's going to be really popular. A lot of people are going to try it out, and
All right, Viv, would you be so bold as to say it could reach the lofty heights of 25%? That would be insane. And also, when you give your guess, tell me a little bit of your thoughts on why you think warriors are so popular, not only amongst the hardcore, but the softcore players as well.
Okay, so I don't know if it'll go all the way to 25%, but I definitely do think it's going to be above 15%. Even a lot of like preliminary polls people are doing on forums and Reddit and stuff like that suggest that is the case. But I think the reason it's so popular is for the casual people. I would guess it's more popular because, like, even if you're a casual player, you can't really get to rating and all that stuff. You still want to have like a challenge. And I feel like nowadays a lot of people read about the, I guess, mystique of the challenging class, the most challenging class to get to max level. And they want that challenge, So that's probably why they go warrior. Other than that, it's just because we're beefy dudes with big pecs and grease us up and we look like Conan the Barbarian.
All right, Dokken. Now let's get your pick when we talk about the jelly beans in the jar. What figure do you reckon I could nail you down to on how many people you're expecting to see as warriors in Classic? And also, do you think that people will stick with it? Do you think they'll be happy with their choice, or is it something that people just dabble in because it's cool and then drift off to other classes?
I would say that I think there is going to be that high percentage, that 15, 20%, maybe even a little bit more depending. And that all varies based on what kind of research players do ahead of time. If they're going to look into what's going to be expected to be the top performing DPS, or, whether they're thinking, hey, I want to be a tank. Well, obviously warrior fits all those kind of roles. You can do, the best tanking in the game, the most mitigation in the game, even aside from what druids can do. I think that one of the reasons people pick it, and one of the reasons I personally pick it, is I just love being that guy. Like, dude, just let me get in there and I'm going to kick some freaking ass. And like, I get this big ass shield and I can do, kind of direct where the raid is going. If you think of your raid or your group as a spear, you're the tip. You get in there first and you get it done.
That's kind of on point with that conversation we were having on Discord about, like, you get in there and you go full ham, and comparing it to like what kind of music would a warrior listen to, and it's like death clock, stuff like that.
Another side on that too is the fact that, like, you are that spear point and you have I think a great impact on the way any given encounter can go because of the position that you hold and the things that you do to make sure that the group is successful. And I think, to me, I like that responsibility. I like the fact that you have a big impact on what's happening.
One of my favorite things about Warrior, and one of the reasons I like playing it the most, a lot of people would say they'll play it because it's like the most OP thing or whatever, but to me, it's the most fun melee class, and that's because like the rotation is pretty, I guess, more reactive and intricate, I guess, than all the other melee classes. And most of the other classes, they were like definitely more than the caster classes, and stuff like that. So I don't know. I feel like it's just more hands-on and reactionary.
Well, one thing I'd love to ask about, and Neil, I'll throw this one to you, and you other guys can comment as you see fit once he's done with his answer, is we hear the term hybrid within the game, and obviously mainly people are referring to shamans and paladins. Now, Svant has taken the extension of that definition a little bit further and said, well, I'd throw warriors in the mix there too. Now, personally, I don't throw it that far. I think that I keep the hybrid definition to someone that can sort of do all three roles, being, tanking, DPS, and healing. But, I sort of see where he's coming from, that if you can do more than one role, then maybe technically speaking, you could be considered a hybrid as well. But I want to read you this forum post that I found, Neil, and it's a relatively short one. It just says this, and this is by Eyes4CK on the WoW Classic subreddit, and it says, hybrid tax exists for all the hybrid classes in vanilla except one, warriors. Fury is the best spec for PvE DPS in dungeons and in raids, while also doubling as a viable off-tank. Prot is the best and only spec for tanking, and not to mention Arms is one of the best specs for pre-made PvP. If you want to play a hybrid class and not suffer from the hybrid tax, just play a warrior in Classic. So my question, Neil, is, would you agree that warriors are a hybrid, and is it a way of just cheating the hybrid tax?
I think it depends what your definition of hybrid is. Mm-hmm. It's like if hybrid, a preconception of, you're doing a lot of things but master of none, maybe, it doesn't fit into the definition. But if we say a hybrid is a class that does two of the roles at least, then yes, it's a hybrid. But I'm thinking that why people are so bent on nerfing vanilla warriors is because the way they're designed is that once they attain a certain gear level, once they get certain, certain procs in, they're hard to stop, really. But to me, that's just design of the class, and I understand it could be frustrating for some people, but there's still a big ladder to climb to get there. Like it's not easy to get there.
Viv, you are someone who really absorbed the developer interviews that we've had on the show recently, such as the chats with Kevin Jordan, Bo Bell, etc., etc. Having listened to those and also taking obviously your own thoughts into account, do you feel that it is unfair, so to speak, to have the warriors as the top tanks and, arguably the top DPS in the game? Or do you think hey, them's the breaks, just deal with it?
That's a really good question. I don't really know how I feel about the answer to that. On one hand, really, if you think about it, it's not really that much of an argument in the first place, because at this point, anyone who's going to play the game knows what they're getting themselves into. So if you specifically want to be a melee DPS, you know your choices coming into it. If you specifically want to be a tank, you know your choices. At the same time, though, to me, class decisions are more about what do you think is the most fun, not really what's going to beat the other class by 5 or 10%, because rogues are still really high up in DPS, even all the way in Nax, so warriors will slightly edge them out or whatever, but I don't think it's really enough of a thing to need to nerf them hardcore or anything. But I don't know. I feel like just the design of the classes should be the way it was either way. So it's kind of a moot point.
Fair enough. Doc, and I'll turn to you. If I were to say, forgetting sort of any kind of class rebalancing or anything like that, I'm not saying, let's nerf warriors or let's touch any of the classes in any way, but simply accepting everything as it is. Do you feel for the plight of perhaps the new player who, let's say they roll a shaman or what have you, and they're like, hey, I get to do a bit of everything. This is great. And then these warriors are coming along and they're just absolutely rolling you in terms of DPS. They're rolling you in terms of tanking, and you discover that you're not all that you thought you might be cracked up to be with your character. And now you're already halfway to 60 and like, shit, now I just got to go do it all again with the warrior because that's what I wanted to be. Do you think that they are OP or that there's any problem with where they're at in the game?
I don't really see any kind of issue with the way they're designed, the way they play. As kind of was alluded to, is you pay the price up front as a warrior. The only the previous question asked too is will people stick with it? And I mentioned in chat over here in Twitch, but I didn't get to actually respond to that because I slipped my mind when I was responding. But the thing is it depends, I think, on whether people know the class and they understand how to play it and they're going to stick with it because they want to get what's at the end, or if they're a first time player and it's their first character, it can be extremely painful to level. And then, late game, you're going to make those gains by sticking with it. Whereas if you kind of, oh man, this is harder than I thought, or it's more of a pain to level than I thought, because you're so gear dependent, which comes with that scaling, which comes with those gains that you get later in the game. I really feel that there's nothing that they should change about it. I think it's okay.
Okay. Neil, now Dokken just mentioned that term sticking with it because, in late game it might pay off for you. And, if people aren't aware, most of the hardcore community is relatively aware that warriors are pretty much the most, arduous class to level with. And the pain of leveling a warrior has been felt by many a player over the years. Now, do you feel that there's a great joke that was put on the Discord by Minoru where he sort of lightly jested with warriors, saying that warriors think that their, quote unquote OP-ness in late game is justified because they had to go through the, the pain of leveling 1 to 60 in the way in which they did. And he was sort of saying, I get to be powerful forever now because I was temporarily gimped through the leveling process. So I wanted to talk about that leveling process a little bit and how tough it is. Talk about that plight of the warrior as they go through 1 to 60 and any memories you might have through the various characters you've leveled. Is it just the fucking worst?
Well, with experience, it becomes less of a pain, but my first warrior that I leveled to 60, I think, is the character I've most died with. It's just that you have so few resources, right? It's not about like being super hard or really, really hardcore. It's just you have a lot less resources than all the other classes, right? So you have to make do with what you have. So, and it kind of is what I fell in love with, right? Because once you get through that level 30, 40, and you like Dokken said, went with it, and you're so proud of what you accomplished, and that builds that kind of relationship, I'll say, with your class, right? That's how I fell in love with the warrior, really.
All right, Viv, let me put this situation to you. Now, I recently tried to level my first warrior, and it was something that to be honest with you, quite enjoyed. And I saw the problems with it and the speed at which I was leveling, which was not very quickly at all. And I sort of started to understand all the gripes that people have had over the years. But the one thing I did, which, flies in the face of something that, the community generally suggests. They say, don't buy things through the auction house as you are leveling. Save your money for your mount and just upgrade through quests. I went out and I'm the weird guy who, if I'm leveling a character I don't particularly care about, I'll go out and buy stuff on the auction house. And it was night and day between the moment before decking out that warrior and after just buying a whole bunch of quite nice level 15 greens. It made it so much easier. Is it the case that you would still say never, ever, ever buy something from the auction house, even as a warrior? Or do you think that certain concessions can be made here and there because it changes things so much?
It really depends on how much it's going for, because, for instance, I've found lately that it's a really good idea if we're not even talking about the auction house, we're just talking about vendors. At the lowest levels, when you first start out in the game, like the starting zone areas will have these vendors that sell weapons, and the weapon you can get from those vendors is like way stronger than anything you're going to get until you're like level 10. So I've started actually kind of, selling all my stuff, making sure I get my skills. And then if I barely have enough to get my skills and still get the weapon, I'll get the weapon at the beginning of the game because it makes the first like 10 levels so much easier and you die way less. So there's stuff like that all throughout the game. If you can figure out like which vendors have good weapons. And actually I think Cargos made a video about that. If I remember right, I think that's Yeah, I think it was him.
Mm-hmm.
He made a video talking about like warrior leveling in general and everything. And that's one of the things he had in there. He has this like big presentation thing with all the weapons you can get from different quests and different vendors and stuff. And that's really useful, actually. Before I ever saw that, I had a very, very clunky giant spreadsheet full of different checklist things to do while leveling a warrior. And I had some weapons in there like that, but I didn't have even close to as many as he had in his thing. So I would recommend that as a resource for sure for any warriors leveling up.
All right. Well, Doc and Viv just touched on it, and you've mentioned, in Twitch chat, is it the case that, as I said, there was a night and day moment for me when I was leveling my first warrior between that trip, sort of before and after the auction house. And before I went to the auction house, as Viv mentioned, I was dying a lot, and it was starting to get a little bit frustrating. Now, it seems like you're suggesting in chat, and maybe I'd ask you to extrapolate on this a little bit, like Viv mentioned as well, and Neil seemed to touch on it too. Why is a weapon the most important thing for a warrior to have? A good weapon?
I feel like it's just doing the damage. I mean, because your top end and your actual DPS output is so limited early on when you have nothing for a weapon. You don't see you don't always see a ton of them. If you know the right quest to go to and you get them, or you go to the right instance and you get that weapon. Sometimes you run an instance once, do all the quests, and you're done. You don't see that drop when you go to the next area. So you might say, hey, I haven't gotten a weapon upgrade for 5-6 levels. I should probably get one. And it's the same thing with the purchasing stuff off the auction house. I very, 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 very rarely buy anything off the auction house unless it's, I'm sitting there with a white item at 20 because I literally just have not seen a green, and I'm like, let me go spend 30 silver and buy something with stamina on it or something with strength on it. But I really personally do try to avoid buying things as well.
Yeah.
Other than that weapon.
Something to avoid, like, as much as you possibly can from the auction house, even as a warrior. Like I was saying, like, the worst levels really are like pretty much like 1 to 15, maybe 1 to 20, when you have like no abilities. Like, even especially before you get hamstring, because it's like the worst. Like, you can't run away hardly. Like, you can't kite people to trade 1-for-1 on attacks. It's like pretty miserable at really low levels. So buying that weapon from the vendor is definitely something I'm going to do like forever now. But, yeah, the whole auction house thing, like, it's not really that big of a deal once you get past level 20-ish, and you shouldn't really buy anything off the auction house.
Well, I was going to say one thing too, and maybe it's a side tangent on this about looking at the weapons and stuff. There's times where I've been leveling a character on places we don't talk about, but
you can talk about leveling.
Okay. Like on private servers, leveling warriors at different times, because I've done now 4 of them over the past about 3 years, and I've started 3 of them with no assistance whatsoever. But I found myself like chasing an item at times where I'm like, oh man, I've got to get a corpse maker. And you realize you've run this instance so many times and you don't get it. And you're like, now I'm just wasting time, and it becomes inefficient chasing an item. It's better just to slug through it with something that's more mediocre to get the levels and then go after the next thing.
Well, Viv, if I can come back to you and push you a little bit, and then Neil, I'll get you to add anything to Viv's answer that he leaves out. But Viv, you mentioned that life after 20 is when kind of, things get great for a warrior. That's when you're cruising a little bit as you get more and more abilities.
I wouldn't go to that extreme, but yes, continue.
Okay. Well, I haven't leveled a warrior past 20. You're talking, as usual, to an absolute noob. So why don't you explain to me what abilities you say just makes that leveling experience a little bit easier? I mean, still, it's tough goings as a warrior, but what makes it what gets it to the point that I'm not corpse running all the time? And if I now, perhaps draw 2 mobs at level 35, I'm not necessarily completely shitting my pants. And also, if I could ask if there are some abilities that you use that you feel maybe most other warriors don't use in their rotation during the leveling process.
Okay, so one big thing that I hear a lot of people always wondering whether it's ever worth using or not is Rend. And at low levels, it definitely is, as long as you know it's going to do all the damage that it can do before you kill the mob, because everything is terrible at low levels. And Rend actually does pretty decent damage. Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing for me is like the first ability that you can get where you die slightly less is Hamstring. And then you still can't really fight 2 mobs for a long time. Like, I still wouldn't say that level 20 is a point where you're not dying,
right?
Like for a lot or whatever. But still, it's way better than like at really low levels, like 1 to 10. Your fear, intimidating shout is pretty big when you get that. But one of the biggest things that lets you actually start leveling as a warrior without hating your life anymore is when you get to level 36, because that's when you get Whirlwind, and then you like actually have a chance of actively killing things without having to worry like whether your next auto attack is going to hit or not. Because before then, you really only have like one active ability to use, like for damage.
All right.
Like once you get Whirlwind, you start getting like an actual rotation of abilities you can use. And then when you get Bloodthirst, it's like all over. It's pretty easy then.
Neil, as you're leveling with your warrior, one of the frequent comments that you see come up about warriors in vanilla is that watch out when you get 2 mobs on you, you're pretty much dead. So as you're leveling, are there some areas that are going to cause you grief? And piggybacking on top of what Viv has just said, are there certain moments where you're like, oh, thank God I've got that ability because now I can actually maybe deal with 2 mobs, or there's certain places I can go to now that I was terrified of before?
The one that immediately comes to mind is Piercing Howl. You get that at level 20, I think, and it just makes your life easier because when you pull 2 mobs, you can still focus on one and just kite the other with Piercing Howl, and makes the whole thing a lot easier.
Before that, you can do it with Hamstring, like tab.
Yeah, but you need to switch targets, so
Yeah, it's more
it's
of a
doable. It's just less. Yeah, exactly. It's just less efficient, but Piercing Howl just makes it so much easier. So that would be my go-to tool for, I'm going into these null packs, like there's 6 of them. Okay. And then Piercing Howl makes it easier.
Dokken, how about you? Any memories of the leveling process? And perhaps I'll ask focus on this one. Any areas in particular on that journey to 1 to 60 that you absolutely fucking hate? Because I'll tell you my experience, and again, it's just low level stuff. But when I play Westfall and I'm a warrior, and you get to the Murlocs on the shore in the ship. 2 of those guys, and I was running away all the time or dying, and I just wanted to tear my hair out. Is there any kind of fun memories or, frustrating memories that you have from leveling your warriors?
I would say, I'm not thinking of a specific area, but it's definitely earlier on in the game as they're mentioning about like not having the ability to, not having Hamstring, not having Intimidating Shout, not having, the ability to do something to combat the situation where you get more than 1 mob at a time, or you're pushing your luck and you're like, oh, I think I can finish another one, and you just pull 1 more, and then you're like, oh crap, I shouldn't have. Any situation you get in like that. Yeah, you get that bad RNG of like, why can't I hit anything? Like that is so frustrating. And it's something you find is like, yeah, you're laughing. It is, I know because you're laughing. But when you get like a couple of points of hit, like you get your Blackstone ring, or if you're getting your Rune of the Guard Captain, depending upon what point in the game you're leveling and how the content's being released, you start getting those items. It feels like a world of difference, and that's amazing. And it goes in line with just getting like your Whirlwind axe. Like at that point in time, like you start getting stuff, you feel so much better. But as far as the difficulty goes, it's just that pushing your luck is something I do. I'm always like, I think I can get this, and I'm an idiot. I shouldn't have done that, but that's just what happens, and it's part of the game. You sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
I just want to say for people starting out on like fresh server, like right when Classic comes out, it's not probably going to be worth it to try to get Whirlwind Axe unless you have some friend that's leveling like 10 times faster than you. Because if you're like at the cutting edge of leveling, you're probably not going to get Whirlwind Axe when it's actually worth it to have it, compared to just going to Desolus, Nigel's Point, and getting that quest from the dude in the inn to go to Scarlet Monastery and get the, whatever that axe is called, Bone Biter, I think. Anyways, that axe from Scarlet Monastery quest is easily as good, if not better, than Whirlwind Axe. And you get it at level 40, which is when you'd be realistically getting Whirlwind Axe without.
That's only for any health. For the Alliance quest, though, because Horde don't have
that
it.
Is Alliance.
The Filthy Alliance, right, Neil?
I'd wager if you could get at least 3 people to help you out, you could have it by like 32, 33. I think you could get it that soon if you have a small team of people to help you get it. And if you don't mind, just elaborating on that, the reason the Whirlwind Axe of Warrior Quest is so iconic because you have such high end damage from it. And again, as you're mentioning Bloodthirst and some of the other stuff, I'm saying, and Mortal Strike was mentioned as well, is that it can be a thing. Is if you go down the arms tree while leveling, you have an inherent ability, like you'll hit more often with a 2-hander than you do dual welding, which is, yes, you can use Bloodthirst with a 2-hander, but at the same time, I would always go the arms tree, at least in what I've learned recently, go down the arms tree because you're going to get your 2-hand weapon specialization. You're going to get 5 crit from the axe. You're going to have your base crit. So if you're getting the Whirlwind Axe or you're getting the other axe mentioned there, you're going to get more crit out of it. And as soon as you have that Mortal Strike, it hits harder because the base damage is based off of like you get and plus damage to the attack versus Bloodthirst being based off of your attack power. And when you're leveling, your gear set doesn't provide you enough strength to give you a high attack power where you're going to hit harder with the Mortal Strike then. And as soon as you have that Mortal Strike, dump your next 5 points into Cruelty, and you can be at like 16, 17, 18 crit, depending on your gear, while leveling. That's huge, I feel like.
All right.
Sorry, I went on a tangent, but
no, not at all. I was loving it. Do you guys have anything?
It is definitely, yeah, I have something to add to that. It's definitely true that if you have a good weapon and really crappy gear, that Mortal Strike is better. At the same time, if you have a really outdated weapon and some decent gear, like everything else is pretty decent, it can be better to have Bloodthirst instead. So it just kind of depends on how garbage your weapon is. But he's right in that if you're keeping your weapons up to date, especially, Mortal Strike is always better.
I think that's what's fun with the Warrior. There's so many different ways to level. I mean, I think I've leveled over maybe 6 or 7 Warriors to 60, and I've tried a different build each time. Like I've tried the
yeah, I have to.
yeah. So like I've tried the dual wield arms. I've tried the prot. I've tried a whole bunch of things, man. It's just okay. It helps because I have my wife healing me like the whole time, but yeah, but still, it's so many different things you can do. And people will say that one is better over the other, but that's like religion, everybody's got one.
I was going to say, how many of you masochists leveled as prot? And I'm laughing because I was thinking back to Nestarius, and I'm like, my brother made a priest and I made a warrior and I leveled as prot, and we just ran 5-mans the entire way to 60. And I was like, that was the stupidest, slowest way to level ever.
I think there's definitely not too big of a difference to where you couldn't do either Fury or Arms. I've even leveled, like Neil said, as I've done like dual wield Fury while leveling. It's a pretty painful experience. But I only started doing it once I got 2 really good swords from dungeon quests and stuff. And it still sucked, to be honest, because you miss so much. But, there's a million specs you can try. And besides prot, maybe I'd encourage anyone to try whatever they want. But, Fury and Arms 2-handed is definitely the only real overly viable options.
All right. Well, we're going to get into the specs now. And just before we get there, Neil, can I just ask you, you said that your wife would heal you as you level your warrior. And it just conjured up the image for me, where I was just like, is date night in Neil's households with you sliding up to your loved one and sensuously whispering into her ear, "Hey baby, want to heal me through Desolus all night as I grind?"
No, actually. Gotta say that any romantic night does not involve World of Warcraft, unfortunately.
Fair enough.
Well, I'm personally going to imagine that that's what he's doing all the time.
I mean, obviously, but it is a game changer. I mean, people talk about those partnerships, and you see it come up a fair bit on forums where people say, "Hey, I'm playing with a friend or I'm playing with a loved one. What's the best duo? What's the Batman and Robin of the classes?" And you do see that, like, actually, warrior plus healer equals face roll. Would you guys vouch for that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I've done it at least 3 times. I've also done Mage Warlock. That was okay, but I think the best one I did was Warrior Shaman. That really kicks some ass. Like, you have so many tools to get out of situations, and you can just pull so much. You just plant your totems, pull like a bunch of mobs, and just go to town. Then you drink and eat for 2 minutes, but it does so much.
Fair enough. Well, look, let's get through the specs now, guys. Like I mentioned, we'll turn to that, and we've got, obviously 3 specs to get through, and there's a reason that you're all here. Dokken, as you've mentioned, you lean much more prot. You're a bit of a prot expert, and you other 2 guys are huge Fury heads. And, well, I'm sure all of you will be able to touch on arms in one way or another. I would have loved to have gotten a real arms expert, and maybe one of you is. I'm not quite sure, but from what we've spoken on beforehand, we'll just touch firstly on Fury, then we'll get to prot, and then maybe we'll round out with arms. Viv, if I can ask you, we'll talk about things like, the most popular specs in the game, and I think Fury Warrior is definitely one of them, obviously through that leveling process and then also going on into raids as well. But is it basically the case that if you're leveling a warrior, it's Fury and nothing else?
For leveling, no. Like we were saying, you can definitely do Fury or arms, mostly depending on gear or what you want out of it. Like especially like Fury can be better if you're in a PvE only scenario, depending on what gear you have. But at the end of the day, if you're on a PvP server, it's probably better to go arms, even if it would be slightly slower based off your gear, because you're going to save a lot of time not dying to people ganking you, because arms is way stronger in PvP.
Neil, would you concur with that? Do you think when we talk about arms versus Fury through the leveling process, we're basically doing the tomato versus tomato thing?
I think it depends if you're leveling with a healer, but if you're solo, definitely arms has more tools to get out of a sticky situation in PvP.
All right, fair enough. There's, the members of the community that say, there's no difference. Just like you guys have. Arms, Fury, it's really not much of a big difference. If you're leveling 1 to 60, just do either of those. Don't do prot, and you are fine. Now, Dokken, I'd ask you, you said you've leveled through the prot experience from 1 to 60 before, but I'm not sure if you've also done arms or Fury, but do you feel that one actually does have a slight edge over the other?
In my experience and the way I plan to level any warrior, since having experienced, doing it as a Mortal Strike or arms or doing it as protection. Protection was literally like a lull. Like I will never level protection again. It was pointless. Like you can do anything you need to do while leveling as arms, and when you get the hit rating, you can switch to Fury if you'd like in your early mid 50s, but I would 100% level arms. I feel that there's advantages to, as I mentioned before, if you're getting either the axe from SM or if you're getting the whirlwind axe, something like that is going to give you more. And even if you don't have the axe, just go arms because you're not going to miss as much. I think you're just going to get better results with the Mortal Strike on average versus going with like a Fury.
Okay. Neil, would you find that if you're running dungeons as you're leveling as a Fury warrior, would you often be at the top of the DPS charts? Would you be surprised if you weren't at the top of the DPS charts? What can people expect as they're meeting other people and sort of having to, measure biceps, if you will, with other classes?
Fury warrior while leveling, even if you're two-hander, you're not going to be top DPS. No, except if you have like the best gear of your level. But I think rogues are gonna stick it to you, and mages probably.
I want to say a couple things here.
Go for it.
So as far as the not missing as much thing, it seems like, are you saying only if you're dual wielding as Fury?
Yeah, I'm saying dual wield. I'm sorry. I always think maybe it's a misconception or a lack of explanation. I'm always thinking Fury is dual wield. You can two-hand Fury, and you're going to have the same rate of hit as you would as arms, and that's just in my head. I'm programmed like old dual wield Fury, but I'm not vocalizing it. But you're correct. Yeah, it would be the same if you go dual wield, or if you go two-hander on either spec.
Yeah. So while leveling, here's the way I look at it. Pre-level 40, Fury is like infinitely better because you don't have Mortal Strike yet, and you get like base crit chance improvement, even like with just like auto attacks and stuff with cruelty. And you get those tools like Neil was mentioning, like piercing howl and stuff like that. So basically up until level 40, in my opinion, Fury is going to be, especially because of like getting that crit and then it applies to your enrage and stuff like that. It's just better pre 40, in my opinion, compared to like deep wounds and improved overpower, stuff like that is what you get pre-40 in the Mortal Strike side of things, the arms builds. So post 40, if you have really good weapons and stuff, yeah, sure, definitely you can respec to arms. So I just like to make that clarification.
Sure. Doc, and if I can ask you this, you seem to touch on it just then, and Viv's touched on it, and it's something that I come across all the time, and again, realizing that I'm totally trying to educate myself on the warrior class, but it seems to be the case that specs within the specs is something that arises with warriors, and you guys have already thrown around terms like you say, hey, you're running two-hander, you're running one-hander, and then I see people saying like, hey man, should I run a shield slam warrior or what? Like, talk to us about the choices that people have. Like, it's not just necessarily fury arms, it sort of is a little bit deeper than that. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, you're at some point, depending. I mean, your goal, I think, when you're leveling is to get the biggest gains you can out of the abilities you can acquire based off of the level that you have. I'm talking going for Mortal Strike. He's talking going for Bloodthirst, and like there's differences on that based upon your gear level and what you have and what weapons you have. And, some of it does come down to playstyle, what you like. And I ultimately tell people, I say, well, do what's fun. It's a game. It's supposed to be fun. If you want to level Prot because you think it's fun, go for it. But you're not going to be min-maxed. You know what I'm saying? And there's always that philosophy to look at it. I tell you, play games because they are fun. So keep that in mind. And these are, I think the conversations we're having are more those things of like what's more optimized for, min-maxing on those things. So that's an important consideration. But, I would say that, I would go for one of the end tree talents in the trees first, whichever you prefer. And then after that, yes, you're going to start, dropping points into the other trees to gain benefits from one or the other based upon, again, either your play style or what's going to min-max for you.
All right. Neil, let's talk a little bit of arms. Now, it's the case where I've, over the last year in all the research that I've done, just reading forums, but again, not having played the class, it's a weird thing where I'm sort of somewhat knowledgeable in terms of reading, but I need some practical experience with the class. But I don't know, but I've heard that, you guys have said arms is fine when you level, but also the talents and the abilities, are skewed the talents are skewed towards the PvP side of things. Tell me why, if I choose a PvP server and I roll with arms and I'm out there in the world PvP and I come across, I don't know, a rogue, a mage or what have you, if I'm deep in that arms tree, I'm not sweating so much.
It's just that you have so many, more tools, right? You have, on the first row, you have deflection, like 5% parry can change many things in a duel versus a rogue, for instance. And then you have tactical mastery, which is for any good warrior in PvP, like you will need to switch to defensive stance and disarm, or switch to berserker stance to whirlwind, or even intercept. Then you have the improved hamstring, which really helps against some of those classes that just run away, right? So there's just a combination of all these tools that make it so much easier to get shit done. And of course, once you get 60 and you have all the high end gear, you can PvP as Fury, right? Because your attack power is so high that you can kill pretty much anyone with a healer. But arms has naturally more tools to deal with it.
Viv, I'll come to you now and ask, is there any kind of difference whatsoever in the stat priority list for warriors between arms and fury? We're talking about now, if I am leveling as an arms warrior, is it literally the same choices that I'd be making with gear if I was a fury warrior, or is there one thing I might like to look to a little bit more?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. The only difference is like the stat of your weapon, but it's not really a stat you really control. It's just whatever your weapon has for damage, because that's the only real difference. Is like your attack power versus your weapon damage between the two. Because everything else is just like, agility gives you crit, strength gives you attack power, even though you don't really get much attack power, like Dokken was saying, from gear, especially at low levels. But yeah, it's pretty much all the same stuff.
I would think you'd just be trying to get your stamina and your strength, and then, whatever weapon you can get that's got more damage to it. That would be the things I would personally look for. I've heard people talk about the spirit leveling setup where you stack spirit. I don't know if either of you guys have tried that or how that works, but it seems kind of hokey to me.
So there's been some conversations lately among the warrior community, I guess you'd call it, that probably agility is better than strength while leveling because, as we've been saying, you don't really get much attack power from strength while you're leveling up because you can't really get enough of it. And agility gives you like a chance to crit, which fuels your talents and stuff. So you'll have like more DPS actually from being able to crit more often while you're leveling up. But another thing to mention is the spirit gear. People are finding out lately that you don't really want to have spirit gear on while you're fighting stuff, but if you're in between mobs and you have like a while to walk to get to another mob or something, it's actually a good idea to have a set of gear that has spirit on it just so you regen out of combat faster.
Well, having heard that point on agility, Neil, what are your thoughts on that in the agility versus strength argument?
I'd have to test it out because I've never personally done that while leveling. I've just stacked strength and stamina just to make sure I would hit hard and I can be hit hard. I've never gone the agility route, so I can't really say how effective it is.
All right, fair enough. Now, Docken, I've got a bit of a doozy for you next as we sort of slightly turn our eye towards prot. I thought we'd just finish up with that and then we'll touch on some end game stuff and then some PvP, but this is quite an extensive post that I found over at the Classic WoW subreddit that I actually really enjoyed that I wanted to put to you and just get your comments on as a sort of an opener to the discussion on prot warriors. And this is going to take about 2 minutes to read, but so just bear with me, buckle up, and listen up. So here we go. It's called The Great Vanilla Warrior Conspiracy, and this is by a user, Bug6, over at, as I said, the Classic WoW subreddit, and they said this. Warriors managed to convince the entire world that they were the only tanking option in the entire game. It was so fucked up. Atrocious social pressure even. It was genius. Let me tell you about it. The first thing they did, and it was quite easy to do it, was convince everyone that the most important factor in raids and dungeons was DPS. The argument was unbeatable. If you deal more damage, you have less healing to do. You raid faster, etc., etc. It was sound and reasonable, everyone, including healers, and they all agreed. But then they figured out the loophole for their own benefit. Threat. Threat is the only limiting factor to raid DPS, so they need to maximize the tank's threat, and to do that, they need to take the build that maximizes threat. And what maximizes threat? Tank damage, they'd say. The only relevant protection talent is the one that boosts threat, they'd say. That was before the armory, mind you. Mortal Strike is the best threat-generating talent, they'd say. Wait 5 sunders, they'd say. And so it began. Tons of arms warriors in pure PvP spec were instantly promoted to main tank as the de facto only raid tanking build. No one dared check if they took the talents for increased threat. Of course, healing became a problem as mana-starved healers started to complain that their tanks were squishy. That's why druids must spec for innovate. That's why shamans must go resto for mana stream totem. That's why paladins must go holy for heals. That's why priests must go holy discipline. Hybrid classes can't tank or do DPS, only pure DPS can because they don't have a choice. Even you, token warlock. We accept you as long as you use blood imp and don't make stacks of sunder fall off with your debuffs. Now summon the rogues. Begrudgingly, the hybrid case accepted their fate with the help of other pure DPS classes. Warriors managed to lay a smokescreen that lasted until Naxxramas, when even with an army of healers and healing raid buffs couldn't sustain the madness that was a main tank in PvP arm spec, Warriors still had it in the bag. I need better tanking gear. Let's pool our guild resources and make me the Thorium Brotherhood epics. Plate repair costs are expensive. When it was pointed out that some protection talents helped reduce the incoming damage, Warriors would say, but the threat is all that matters. Just wait 5 sunders. We wiped because mages couldn't hold aggro. It became unbearable by the end of BWL. Due to social pressure, mages had to shoot their wand for the last half of the fights. Warriors had to feign death on hunters had to feign death on cooldown. Rogues had to feint, vanish, and bandage. Even pure DPS classes started to become angry. Use Blessing of Salvation. Don't use Wind Fury totems. We need more healers, tanks would say. Never mind that using more DPS and less healers would have solved that problem. Then the armory came live, and people saw warriors for what they were. The majority majority didn't even spec those 5 points in prot for increased threat. Respecs are too fucking expensive. I have crazy repair costs, they would say. For roughly a year, shamans and paladins were denied a roll on Sulfurous. Your resto, our off-tanks need it more than you. Rogues were denied a roll on Thunder Fury. It's a tanking weapon. Tank threat indirectly increases raid DPS. When called out on their deception, they had the sweetest reply. Don't look at me. These fuckers have been shadow spec the entire time. It's time Pallies, Shamans, and Bear Druids got their deserved spot as a tank. Ugh, thank you for bearing with me through that fucking long post. But I thought it was an interesting one because I'm just using that as my introduction to talk about prot warriors. And we talk about tanks through the game, through 5-man dungeons, going through all the contents. Now, is there anything that you'd particularly like to add or comment on that sort of somewhat tongue-in-cheek post? But also my question would be, tell me why or why not warriors are still the go-to tank for 5-man dungeons.
As far as if you are solely focusing on 5-man content, I cannot speak to paladins. I don't know. I know that Meldron Def Camp, their channel, they have done a video on shaman tanking and whether it's viable or not. I also don't really know anything about that. It's not something, obviously, that has grabbed a large portion of the community because no one does it. I think one time in all of my experience, I ever actually saw a shaman wearing a bunch of defensive gear and tanking stuff with Rockbiter on, like standing like he was going to tank. He was in a 40-man raid that was headed to Molten Core. At least he was running with them, headed that direction. And I'm like, is that for real? Like, that's literally what went through my head. As far as 5-mans go, in all reality, I think druids can do perfectly fine. Warriors can do perfectly fine. Do you need to be spec protection to tank 5-mans? No. Do you need to be spec protection to tank in raids? No. You can use Furies as off tanks. You can even use Furies as main tanks. It depends. There's been some discussion we were talking about in the chat even, on the private servers, the ability to sit down and proc an enrage proc, which gives you 25% increased damage, is something that like a Fury tank would do. They literally won't even use a shield. They'll just stack like a ton of stamina. You get your hit rating, and then they will wait till they get full health. They sit, they get a proc, they get enraged. They do a crap ton of threat by doing that. But there's discussion as to whether that's even going to work in Classic. And I noticed that in the Classic demo, it did not function. Well, you couldn't test it as a warrior, but people were saying, excuse me, back that up. People were saying that the priest ability that would proc when you would get crit was not working when you sat and got crit. And I forget the name of the ability right now. But it also comes down to, are you min-max or are you just going for what's functional? Yes, druids can be a functional tank. I agree with that. Are they an optimal tank? No, because they don't have parry. The only fight that they're going to be basically comparable on is a fight that's a magic resistance fight. So like Rag, for instance, you have a druid can do just as well because all the damage is fire-based as a warrior. It's based off your resistance and your hit point pool. Threat fights, well, it depends. What build tank are you using? Are you using a prot warrior? Or are you going to be using a fury tank? Are you going to be using a druid? Yes, druids can do it. But like, for instance, we did Thaddeus. And again, these are all based off private server experiences. On Thaddeus, we took a feral druid with us to be one of our hateful strike tanks for Patchwork and for Thaddeus because, well, they do threat based off of damage that they do. And with the multiplier from the positive negative charge, we're like, well, the druid will do better. But we had a fury. He did have a Thunder Fury, which does impact that, who would be able to easily overtake him. And I don't know if it's the druid play or the warrior play, you know, as their rotation or how they're doing some RNG, or if it was just that the fury could outdo it. But the thing is, are they viable? Yes. Are they optimal? No. You know, as far as prot goes, there's certain things that does matter, and there's certain things that, like, you know, you can do as a fury. I think prot, to me, you're a little bit more durable. I think you make it a little bit easier on the healers. Do you lack some of the threat that the furies may have? Yes. Give or take, depending. You know, it's all in play style as well. It's also in the guild style. You know, like, guilds have a flavor to them as well. You know, you join a guild and they're like, oh, we do Molten Core and we don't really, you know, check anybody's builds and worry about debuffs and worry about that. You know, you have to consider all those factors as well, because it's all going to impact how the threat generation is going to be. If you're min-maxing debuffs, the druid's going to be able to do a little bit better, I think, because you're going to have your Fairy Fire, your Sunder, your Recklessness, you know, all those things that's going to help them. A warrior is going to get gains from that too, But at the same time, if you're in a guild that's not, then the druid may not do as well as they could. And there's a lot to be like considered as far as your makeup, your debuff allocations. And I guess I'd sum it up and say, yes, they're viable. The shaman and paladins, I don't know so much, but druids definitely are. And as far as Thunder Fury being a non-option for rogues, it does come down to, my mind is your tanks get Thunder Fury, your Furies who sometimes tank get Thunder Furies, and then after that you give to the Fury who might tank once every 10 years, rather than give it to a rogue, because the rogue's going to end up they're going to get aggro, bad things can happen. If you've ever used one, there's times it'll wipe your raid if it procs on pull because you need to take it off. Like, Farlana, however you say it, for Nax as an example, you don't pull with it on because if it procs, it hits all the mobs that come to you, you die. That's a lot, and I hope I got everything and didn't miss anything. But
no, that was it.
I'd like to throw some stuff in there too. As far as druids in dungeons, I just want to throw out something that I've noticed playing on private servers, in that druids are amazing, not only in dungeons, but even in 15, especially in Upper Blackrock Spire, because they can pull with their hibernate on the dragons and stuff, and easily hold aggro and everything, because druids have way better aggro for short dungeon fights than warriors will ever have. They easily hold aggro in dungeon fights. But yeah, that's one thing. That's point one, I guess. And then point two is in huge AoE fights. I actually played not only with a druid tank on Elysium, but also with a paladin tank. One of our guild members had a paladin tank. He was like a healer, but he was also a tank. Like he spec back and forth because he was a rich bastard. But anyways, AoE pulls, even in raids, like paladins are amazing in dungeons as well, but even in raids on like huge AoE pulls where warriors would normally be like spamming demo shout to keep aggro, paladins can just as easily do those kind of pulls with consecrate for instance, the imps in Molten Core. However, paladins aren't very good otherwise tanking in raids because they don't have taunt, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say the consideration under something like that is the viability as a slot to the raid. It's like, okay, could you bring a paladin to do one or two tasks in a raid? And then you say, well, what else do they bring? Yeah, they can kind of like not heal as well, or they can do this or that. But I would, in a situation like that, from a min-max standpoint, it's like, yeah, I would argue that you might as well just use a warrior and save yourself that slot from having a paladin as prot.
That's true, but he wasn't full prot spec in raids. He just went for, what is that called? Blessing of Sanctuary or something like that. Is that the one that is good for tanking?
Yep.
Yeah. So he would get that and then go full healing basically. So he was actually just a healer in every other fight, but then would tank on that. But we actually started just using the warrior for the pulls in the long run anyways. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Either way you can do it is my point. Like, it might not be like the best thing ever, but if a paladin wants to do that, they can do it.
That comes down to is it viable? Yes. Is it optimal? No. And I think that there's a lot of things in vanilla that are that way. And I think it's good to be able to for people to recognize those nuances and things that classes can do, because everyone's like, oh, you can never be a boomkin. And I'm curious to see, because my understanding is every boss in the private server scene, at least on like Northdale and whatnot, that they have too high a resist of nature resist on bosses and stuff. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I had heard that, and it makes me think yeah, are they good? I have no idea. Everybody says, okay, can PvP with them. Could they be quote unquote the S-Fen, and they go super hard on all the consumes and they do this and they do that? And if your group is downing a boss in 30 seconds, what does this mana pool matter? It's it's just something I'd be curious to see, and it could potentially be a viable thing, but definitely maybe not optimal.
Neil, if I can ask you something now. I was biting my tongue and holding back as Dokken dropped a hard Thunder Fury reference, and I wanted to dive in with the did someone say Thunder Fury, Blessed Blade of the Windseeker? But now that it's come up, Neil, you told a great story on the show recently via a memory lane submission. I believe it was you. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it was you.
Totally was him.
Yeah, Neil. And at the time that you caught the cab over to your girlfriend's place when you were having computer issues and you ran up the stairs, it wasn't that rom-com moment where you're wet from the rain running up the stairs to tell her you loved her. You told her, get the fuck out of the way. I need to get onto my raid group so I can get this drop from MC for the what you needed for Thunder Fury, obviously. Now, if I can ask, and obviously I'm being hyperbolic. He didn't actually say get the fuck out of the way to his lovely girlfriend, who's now his wife. But Dokken mentioned that, the kinds of people that Thunder Fury might go to. And he said, you probably want your tanks getting it. Then you probably want your, DPS warriors getting it. Then maybe third down the totem pole is the rogues or whatnot. Tell me how you would feel if through your time trying to get Thunder Fury, you were trying to argue or battle with a rogue over it.
I think it comes down to to the other point that Dokken mentioned, which is it depends on the guild, right? There's going to be all sorts of guilds. There's going to be super try-hard guilds or super optimized, and this item goes to that person, and so on and so on. Or there's going to be super casual guilds that are going to give their first Thunder Fury to a pally. That's going to happen too. So I'm not going to have that problem this time because I'm not going after the Thunder Fury. Like I did that already. It's fine. But, I think it comes down to guild antics, basically. Like if you guys really want to give a Thunder Fury to a rogue, that's fine. But you just have to make sure that everyone's on board with that because, it's clearly not optimal, but it can be fun. It can be like whatever,
we actually had, and maybe some of you guys, if you played on the Stars, you guys would remember the Team Blackout. We had something ridiculous with Thunder Furies. Like we had four of them and like two halves, and one of the guys quit, and then we gave a half to a rogue, and people were like, other people we told that were not in our guild were like, what the F? Why would you give half to a rogue? Because we literally had so many of them. We're like, well, we got to give rogues a chance.
Well, I'm seeing in Twitch chat from Mike, who's been on the show before, and he's being tongue-in-cheek, but saying, Thunder Fury is clearly a rogue weapon. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't go to rogues. Obviously, there are rogues who have had Thunder Fury, but just piggybacking off of Dokken's priority list, if you will. So, Viv, do you think that priority list is very much so what it should be? And it seems to fall in line with the community generally says is, warrior tank, maybe a Fury warrior, and then you can worry about rogues and whatnot after that.
Warrior tank is pretty much unquestionable because if you let a DPS have Thunder Fury before your tank, if it's like a try-hard guild, that DPS is going to be struggling to not pull threat off the tank with a Thunder Fury because Thunder Fury really is a good amount of threat per second. So, I mean, warriors, especially Fury warriors, are already having a hard time staying under threat meters of the warrior, especially on the Horde side with no Blessing of Salvation. So, giving them a Thunder Fury before the tank is a really bad idea, in my opinion. But as far as rogues, I don't really see it as much of a difference between a rogue having it and a warrior having it. Even, I guess, in a way, you could actually argue that a rogue could drop all of the threat with Vanish that they would get from Thunder Fury. So, I mean, there's a way to reason it either way for rogue or warrior.
I would say one of the reasons you would give it to your Furies over that is, and maybe it's an environmental or like a social thing that goes along with some of the private server community, is the attrition that takes place is what I would describe as horrendous from a guild leader standpoint. And having the availability of additional warriors that like, hey, you got it. If you get it, like you give it to them under the condition, like if we need you to tank, you're tanking, and you can step them up, and there they are.
It's exactly true. And not only that, but as an off tank, even if you're one of the people who is a Fury DPS, but you switch over to tank on certain boss fights, having that Thunder Fury is going to help in that case as well. So that's exactly the reason that most people do that. But as far as if you're trying to stay DPS and you never want to switch to tank, I wouldn't see there being any advantage one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing, and just a side note on the legendaries, and again, this speaks from a management standpoint, is we always also considered the fact of like giving out an item like that. How long has someone been around? And, quote, have they been in the spirit of the guild, or have they been someone that's deserving of an item of that tier? And I always thought that was a great consideration out of those types of items.
Yep.
Doc, and if I can just press you a little bit further, sorry, I wasn't 100% sure. You might have mentioned it, but maybe I haven't picked up on it. Have you picked up a Thunder Fury before?
Yeah, I did have one back on Nastarius, and then on the recovery thereof, I had it for a while. Okay. On was it Elysium?
Elysium, yeah.
Yeah, Elysium. So, yes.
Okay, and Viv, you've gotten it before, is that right or not?
No, I've never had it.
Okay, Doc, and so I'll ask you this question. We've heard Neil's sort of fun story about the trials and tribulations that he went through in trying to get this legendary item. Do you have any fond memories or commentary on the grind of going through, the pain that you have to go through? Well, whether it's pain or not, or it's fun, the lengthy process that goes into getting Thunder Fury.
Well, it worked really well for me. I got my first finding, and I was like, oh my God, it was like, loot that to me, and I immediately like logged off. Didn't just logged off to say, do your character save when you log off. I had it, and I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll go out and I'll do some extra farming, try to get the crystals. Like, I'm not really going to push. And it was literally 2 weeks later I got the other binding, and I was only at about 30 crystals, and I did not have the funds to buy everything I needed, but the following raid reset, I had everything. I went out, farmed it. My brother gave me some gold. People were contributing. Like, our guild pitched in. And so I basically had it from start to finish in, I think it was like 4 weeks, which was crazy fast.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I'd say it was amazing to get it. And then one of the things was like getting it so quickly was crazy amazing to me. And just the experience of sitting there thinking, oh my God, I've got this. We're getting ready to do Thunderian, and spawning him and just kind of like, oh my God, this is great. And like, our whole guild was there, and people that were not in the raid were there, and they're watching. And, that was neat. Doing it the first time was really, really neat.
Oh man, the feels. I feel it.
I have so many screenshots from that, just like, I've used them at different points and stuff, and it's really cool.
Well, I'd ask
you guys are putting a longing in my soul to get a Thunder Fury.
Oh, you got to do it, Viv. Everybody, all the cool kids are doing it. You got to do it. So, Doc, and are you one and done like Neil? Never again?
I'm planning on running my own guild when Classic drops, and as I said when I did it on the Starius, I said the only first things I'm going to prioritize myself for is the Thunder Fury and Tier 3. Everything else we can distribute. Whatever.
All right, very good. I like the optimism. As I said to a listener as well, I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. So, what I will say from here is, now that we've covered off on a bit of Thunder Fury, a bit of all the specs and all that jazz, I just wanted to touch a bit more on endgame. And we talked about, protection warriors versus other classes. It's all well and good for 5-mans. That's great. Play whatever you want. It's, everyone's going to be able to get through maybe at the end of the day, min-maxing, blah, blah, blah. However, Docken, you said something that piqued my interest, and Neil, Docken, I'll start with you and then we'll go to Neil. You said that you don't necessarily even have to be prot for raids, and I presume you mean some raids, but I'd ask you to extrapolate on that a little bit more. Is it just like Molten Core? Can you get away with not being prot? And just sort of talk about the warrior's journey as they start to raid and going through Molten Core and what people can come to expect.
When I mention the not being a protection warrior, meaning that you're gonna I'd have to sit with the talent calculator to make it exactly right, because I have not personally done it, but I know people who have, and you're using that method of getting the enraged to proc in the Fury tree, and using just your basically your raw damage. It's essentially giving a Fury warrior an unlimited threat cap and the ability to hit and do as much damage as they possibly can. And that's what puts them at the forefront of your KTM or your threat meter. And that's how they would tank. And you have to have, you're going to set yourself up with like a macro or script to, if you spike really hard, you have to swap in your shield, or, you know, if you're needing to make sure you're monitoring your health pools, like, okay, you would look at your incoming heals if you're using like Lunar Frame showing the incoming heals, that kind of stuff. Okay, I'm full, sit down, get that proc, and we still debate whether that's going to work in Classic or not. And if it doesn't, I think there'll be some new theories that come out about the viability of it. Will it still work the same? Will it still be good? Yes or no? I don't know. But you can definitely do that. My personal favorite, I always do like Shield Slam, and I go down to Impale, and I just try to stack agility for avoidance, armor, crit, and then you're going to get your threat that way. And I feel like I have a fairly solid understanding of the threat generation based off of your rotation for, you know, protection. But there's definitely things that can be done there. Can you off tank as a Fury? Like in what I would call a optimized raid group, in my mind, maybe other people would disagree or they have other opinions. You guys might want to chime in on that then. But I would not take in the future more than 2 protection warriors to a raid, and all the other warriors would be some mix of Fury, because if they're not tanking on a given boss, you want them DPSing, and they're not going to do the DPS. They're not going to do the DPS as a prod.
That's exactly what my guild did on Elysium. We had 2 main tanks basically, and everyone else. Well, we had like, you know, a main tank and a prot off tank, if you want to call it that, whatever you want to call it. Either way, but all the other people were Fury, and just we got all the gear after they did, you know.
Yeah, my plan for my future raid group in Classic will be 1 prot tank and 1 feral druid, and that will be my only 2 tanks.
Fair enough. Now, Neil, if I can push you a little bit further and ask you to pick up off of what Dokken has said. Now, talking endgame warriors, and again, much of your experience is on the DPS side of things as opposed to the tanking side of things, and we'll come back to tanking later on. But as that DPS warrior, and you're starting your raiding adventure, you're going through Molten Core and you progress on through there, what should people come to expect from that raiding experience? Is, I mean, obviously people are quite aware that perhaps, you know, warriors being great DPS, and maybe it won't be that hard to find a guild that will take you. And then, you know, flowing on from that, it might be a relatively, I don't know, breezy experience as a warrior because you're kicking ass on the meters and everyone loves you. But is there any one particular raid where it can be problematic being a warrior, or is it pretty much all the same?
I think vanilla raids favor ranged in most fights, not all of them, but melee life is usually harder than ranged. So I don't think there's a particular fight or raid that's harder on warriors. Maybe Blackwing Lair, because you need a bit more tanks, like for the drakes and stuff, depending on your strat. But I don't see like being different from like on terms of you know, of difficulty. Like it's not different from rogues. But I will say this though, for any warrior that's looking into to do some progressive raiding, be a responsible warrior, man. Like you can put on those True Strike shoulders, those Devil's Oar stuff on you. You can be a leather daisy all you want, but carry a tanking set with you all the time. Keep that shit updated. Like, be a responsible warrior, man. That's something that's really dear to me.
If you're not bringing a tank set as a warrior, you're already not prepared in my mind.
Yep, yeah, you're doing it wrong.
It doesn't matter if you fully DPS. There's that one night when 3 people are stuck at work and you're like, hey, we need a tank. Put your stuff on. The guy's like, it's in the back. You're like, dude, go get it, you idiot.
So you got to be able to jump in the phone booth like Superman and to be ready to go.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yep. You know, and you were mentioning Blackwing Lair being less fortuitous for warriors, and it's something that sticks in my mind. The one time I did do a DPS as a primary, I literally hated it when I first went in there. I'm like, dude, I die every third pool or every other pool because maybe it's my lack of being, you know, familiar with DPS, but I just felt like that place is not forgiving on the, you know, the Drake trash.
Yeah. It's hard on melees. Now,
just focusing on the sort of deeper end game content, and Dokken, we'll turn back to the tanking side of things. Is there any raid that slightly makes you poo your pants as a tank?
In respect to
just being difficult, or mechanics, or wipes, or if you're not sort of, if you take one eye off the screen.
Auger.
That's funny. I would say, let me just start with a general overall statement about it is my feel on tanking for raids. I feel like MC is very, very straightforward. It's not something you would, overly worry about. There's very few things that you need to consider as far as like your movements, like face it away from the raid. And, you might have a fear dodge or a mind control break as an undead or, a couple of minor things like that. Not a big deal. Blackwing Lair, there's a few, some threat control. There is a few placement and directionals with the bosses, but then you get into AQ and you start looking at it. It's not even so much the bosses until you get to the imps, but, the trash in AQ can be very testy, and it's about splitting it, and some of that's on your pullers, and some of that's on picking it up, and some of there's all those things that go along with it. So I would say you start to see that in AQ. I personally, only got to tank the Twin Emperors a couple of times, and I only got to tank on Cthulhu a couple of times. And the Emperors was something I never got to get the best feel for in the transitioning. It was just, well, we outgeared it, and I took a little bit of extra damage is what had happened there. And I think Nax, there is a little bit more here and there you've got to be mindful about, definitely. But I had never personally been able to do the Horseman, and everybody says that is a very critical tank fight, and there's a lot of things you have to focus on there. So I would argue that is, and that people say Kel'Thuzad, I've not done that one, is very, very important that the tanks are on point because of grabbing the ads and then having to switch at different times, and correct me if I'm wrong, switch from KT to ads and things like that. I'm not as familiar as I should be with it.
I think the harder fights for warriors is AQ trash. I just remember oh my god, the AQ 40 trash is really fucking horrible. Like even the trash before Twin Emps, that shit is nasty. Those spinning guards that keep running everywhere it makes you sweat a bit.
The trash is tough, but it's not that the warrior, it's not the warrior's fault at times, because they mind control. Some of them are just, they drop threat, or they just move around. They're not really tankable, and you end up with this mess, and you're not necessarily quote tanking. You might be just trying to mitigate damage that it does, which is actually falls into the 5-man content even with warriors. Is like, you don't necessarily have to tank at all. You have to mitigate the damage that's coming in. And that's either by your armor class, or that's by stunning with concussion, or maybe you're fearing at certain times, things like that, hamstring and kiting, whatever. But those are all nuances of tanking.
Neil and Viv, if I can ask you, we talked about, and sorry, if anyone else was about to jump in, please do so. But we talked about how you need those 2 sets on you at all times, just in case you need to actually jump into your tanking gear, even though you are a DPS warrior. And the two of you seem to focus a bit more on the DPS side of things, but I'm sure you've done a little bit of light tanking in your time. But if I can ask you, if you have had to jump into those shoes of being the tank when you are so used to being a DPS warrior, is it a jarring change, or do you kind of know the raids and you think, no, even though I normally do this as DPS, I'm pretty confident in my ability to lead the raid around and tank stuff?
As a DPS warrior, you're not normally suddenly leading the raid when you switch to tank, but unless you're already the raid leader in the first place. But as far as switching over to tank all of a sudden, I mean, tanking's not really that difficult, and especially in an off-tank capacity. Just all you really have to do is whatever mob they assign you to tank, you just do that. You just stand there and keep threat. I'm thinking of things like Gar, where there's 1 million ads and they have to be tanked and banished and all that crap. You just pop on your set and stand away from everyone and tank. Not much to it.
I think it speaks to the experience that warriors get while leveling, right? Like you do those couple dungeons, you level, you pull 3-4 mobs, you kind of don't have a choice to get the feel of managing mobs, right? It comes with the job. So even if you're used to Fury DPS at the end game, you pretty much have that experience of, you might not have that high end tanking experience, but you still have the basics. Every warrior knows the basics.
Okay, well, you said every warrior that knows the basics, and I'm about to prove you wrong because, and again, I'm not exactly a warrior, but Doc, and I'll turn this one to you, and you seem like the kind of person who, you know, as we all are, but you mentioned it during this show that, you know, you play games for fun, and the whole point at the end of the day is to have fun. Do what you like, and, you know, don't let anyone sort of drag you down, blah, blah, blah. But that's always been the company line, absolutely, and I do sort of vouch for that as well. However, I'll say this. When I leveled a warrior again, only to about 20 or so recently, I went and did the Dead Mines, and I was like, hey, I'm really excited to tank my first dungeon. This is going to be absolutely amazing. I've heard so...
Oh, you poor soul.
Yeah, I've heard so much about...
We're all just snickering right now.
Well, I mean, it's the snickering that I want to hear about because, yeah, I mean, we've all had that moment where it's like, literally, could you smash cut in memory back to that time 15 years ago or whatever when you first tanked a dungeon? Because that's what I went through a few weeks ago, and I was like, this is going to be great. And about 2 hours later, I was a broken man. And I have not felt that much pressure during a video game for a bloody long time. And my heart was beating out of my chest. I felt like I was letting people down because I was dying. I was shit. I didn't know if I was facing mobs the right way. I didn't know how to pull mobs. I was like taunting everything, even though it was already hitting me. I just had no idea. And I literally walked out and said, I'm never doing that again. But to put it to you, Dokken, can you remember, is it like sex? Was everyone horrible the first time and you should just keep at it?
Well, if you're referencing that, I was always great, but, but I wouldn't say that like, it would be hard for me to recall the first time I went and tanked. And I would also say that having not been my very first character, you have the understanding of a lot of things. You're familiar with the instance. You're familiar with where the mobs are. You have seen someone muddle through it at some point, whether it was a terrible tank, whether it was your main tank for your guild at the time, but you've seen the content in advance. So you have some idea. But at the same time, I know that feeling you get, and that feeling of like, what the F is going on? Why is everything hitting everyone but me, and I'm facing the wrong direction? And that even happens sometimes now, because things just go catastrophically wrong. Like you're like, miss, dodge, parry, resist. And you're like, well, frick. And then at the same time, there's times where you're like, charge in, okay, you know, on a safe pack to do that because you can't always. You're like, all right, I'll open with the thunder, throw my force reactives on because I'm just going to, you know, get some AoE threat and they're not going to CC because it's not that much. Knowing that. And then you're like, well, hit this guy with a shield slam, switch thunder. And then you're doing everything right is what I'm getting at. You're doing everything right for that particular pack. And for whatever reason, that one guy is like hammering the ever-living shit out of the one mob that you only have a single sunder on. You got 4 sunders on the other targets. You just happen to miss that one in your rotation. You're like, well, guess what? You're tanking that or you're dying because there's no way I'm getting it back. Everything else is on cooldown. And that just happens. And that's not on necessarily the tank. That's on the player not either prioritizing their targets right, or maybe they just got really big crits. You know, it happens.
Yeah. If you're a DPS, public service announcement, attack whatever the tank is attacking as much as possible in a dungeon setting. I was also going to say, to backtrack really quick, talking about DPS warriors should be able to tank in raids, and how Neil was saying most warriors will know how to tank, you know, already. And the reason that's really true, maybe not necessarily for someone who's still leveling up, you know, because you're just leveling. Maybe you haven't even really done that many dungeons. But at end game, the best way to farm your DPS gear is to first get tanking gear and then spam the crap out of dungeons, because it's way easier to basically spam dungeons when you're the tank, because everybody needs a tank. So if you're the raid leader and you're just tanking dungeons left, right, and center, you can get your DPS gear, like, because you want your DPS gear to be way better than your tanking gear at the end of the day. Like, you want all the best stuff for your main spec. So you get your decent tanking set, and then you spam dungeons nonstop until you get all that best pre-raid best in slot DPS gear. So basically, by the time you're raiding as a DPS, a Fury DPS, you're already going to know how to tank because you just did it like a million times to get all your gear for raiding. And then on the other point, as far as like just starting out tanking, the reason I was like snickering and when you were talking about the first time you did Dead Mines is because I remember the first time I tanked in Dead Mines. And I was like, oh, I remember this horror story coming back to my mind because I didn't know a long time ago, like what abilities I had did the most threat. I just knew that taunt immediately gave me threat. And then I was like kind of lost on like what I should use in a given point because I didn't understand like the different threat numbers on different abilities. Like I didn't have any clue what was what. I just like, okay, revenge is something that apparently gives me threat. Press that every time it shows up. You know, I didn't really know what I was doing, but once you actually learn what you're doing, just by like reading the different threat values, I think that's the hardest part to learn as a tank starting out is just like what keeps the mobs attacking me.
Neil, can I ask, do you have any fun memories from the first couple of times you tried to tank a dungeon?
I remember dying a lot, basically, because, you know, we were all noobs back then, so were the healers, so, like, my wife's sitting beside me and she's looking at me like, not me. Oh, yeah, okay, so, no, like, I'm talking the early levels. Yeah, it was, I think it was a mess, like mobs running everywhere, like you're trying to figure out what's the best way to get that mob back, or it's hitting the healer. Oh my God, what can I do? It's yeah.
A lot of tanks at first, when they're starting out as well, because of that panic of mobs running all around, they won't stay on one mob long enough to actually establish enough threat to then switch mobs. So that's another thing you got to try to do is like, even if that one mob goes off and starts attacking someone, maybe you keep generating some extra threat on this mob you're already on until you get enough to where you're confident someone's not going to steal it right back off of you when you switch mobs. So then when you do switch mobs, you taunt it up. And then, now I definitely have established threat on these two. They're going to stay on me and I can keep using my abilities and tab targeting, you know, stuff like that. So that's a big thing is, basically just knowing that you don't have to try to panic and run directly when something gets peeled off of you to get it back.
That's another big thing too that you're saying there is like not necessarily having to get it right away. And tanking, like you can look at your threat meter, but when you're tanking 3 or 4 things in a 5-man, it doesn't do you any good really. And I would describe it as you get that feel for whether you're good or not. And that's something like, that feel of like, okay, I'm good on this mob. Like, okay, now this one, I feel a little uneasy that one's stuck on me. And that guy over there punching the hunter in the face is clearly not the one that I've got. And you're intercepting, taunting, pulling back. And, you know, you kind of get those hairy situations that come up. But, I would describe it as like you just get a feel to it and you just start to know.
Yep.
All right, well, you guys have made me feel a little bit better for being a horrible tank. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Look, the last topic I want to hit on before I let you all go is just very lightly. Well, actually, sorry, I'm lying. The second last topic is just that of PvP very briefly. Now, Viv, I think you may have mentioned that you've PvP'd a bit as a warrior. Is that right?
Actually, the complete opposite. I've PvP'd tons as a mage and none as a warrior, pretty much. Right. Besides like open world stuff. That's
right. Sorry, Neil. How about you? Much PvP experience?
I've done mostly world PvP as my PvP experience, but you know, I was kind of cheating. I always had my guildmates with me and fully decked out in gear. So I never did the battleground grind. I never did that.
You're the guy that rolls around with all his buddies and people can never pick you off one-on-one.
Well, 5-man roaming Stranglethorn Vale gank squads.
No, we were actually ganking the people that were summoning bosses in Silithus, you know? Those big bosses, like we would just run in and AoE fear and just like cause chaos for everyone. That was really good times.
Fair enough. Doc, and how about you? Have you spent much time in Battlegrounds or World PvP?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, when I'm doing PvP things, most of the time I like to consider myself one of the top PvPers in existence. And, you know, what I do is I go into like a regular Warsong Gulch and I run around in the middle and shield slam people with a one-hander on. And everyone in the Battleground screams at me and tells me to effing AFK because I'm terrible. That's a meme. That's a meme, guys. Come on. No one wants a protection warrior unless you're doing AV for PvP, and I'm generally terrible at it.
Okay. Well, that's all right. Maybe we'll skip the PvP for.
What is the PvP related question? Because maybe I can as a second hand, as a mage being smashed in the face by warriors getting healed in Warsong Gulch 24/7 back in the day. I may be able to help if it's a general question.
Well, it is pretty general. I was going to say that, again, just going by the vibe of the forums, I feel like, warriors don't get a lot of chat as a respected PvP class. Tell me if I'm way off base, but I feel like people don't say they're shit, but people generally don't say they're good. So as a warrior running around in battlegrounds and whatnot, can you be expected to kind of be picked off a lot and you're not maybe going to have the best time?
No, that is a very incorrect. Well, let me put it this way. All right, let me walk you through the whole experience of a warrior in PvP.
Go for it.
Starting off, when you're leveling up in the world, you get steamrolled by basically everyone because you suck. That's pretty much the way warriors are when they're leveling. They're terrible at 1 versus 1, especially when they don't have any gear. Once you get geared, it might be a different story if you're really good. But then you get into battlegrounds, and you have crappy gear at first. If you're solo queuing in battlegrounds, God have mercy on your soul, because
you're gonna get wrecked.
You're gonna get wrecked all the time.
That AV grind, man.
Yeah, you're gonna get kited nonstop. But if you're a very geared, even in raid gear, you don't even have to have PvP gear, but if you're a really geared warrior and you queue with a healer, you will steamroll every battleground and be of the face of death that everyone fears, and you'll be the most overpowered PvP class in the entire game.
So what you're trying to say is I have to play with Neil's wife.
I would even go to
Pretty
say,
much.
as far as if you have a paladin with you and you are a warrior, you will be that literally unstoppable because of Blessing of Freedom. That's just like a warrior that cannot be slowed down, held in place, and you're just running around wrecking everybody with a giant two-hander.
Yeah, prepare those polymorphs, pretty much.
Fair enough. All right. Well, that makes a bit of sense. As I said, I'm sure there's no one class that is considered horrible in PvP, I think. Let me know if you guys want to shout me down on that one. But just from the general vibe of the forums, that's just something I've come across where, no one shits on any one particular class saying, God, if you want to play PvP, do not roll this class. But there's certain classes that are obviously talked about more when the PvP conversation comes up. And I just find that warriors generally aren't among the mix. But
well, the reason for that probably is because most warriors are weak. If you're not queuing with someone else, you're going to get wrecked, as I was saying. But more importantly, until you're super geared and have a bunch of friends with you, you basically, you as a geared person, you destroy everyone pretty much. So just keep that in mind. Up until the point you have all the best gear, you aren't anything special compared to anyone else. And you probably will get wrecked by the classes that are talked about more often in PvP. But if you are that super geared dude with the healer, you're unstoppable.
Fair enough. All right, let's turn to the last topic now. I'm going to tear through all of you on this one. Neil, we'll start with you, then we'll run down the list. Now, just very briefly, are there any particular items that are near and dear to your heart when you look back on your time as a warrior and you get excited about the warrior that you're going to roll in Classic? Is there a particular moment or item when you're like, oh God, I can't wait to equip that one?
Bone Reaper's Edge.
Ooh.
Really, for me, on weapon, I would have to say the Untamed Blade. Not because it's the most OP weapon, because it's not, but it's just when everything procs together, you get those hits, man. It's just nuts. I have fond memories of pulling aggro on Nefarian with that weapon.
So here's the thing, first of all, that question entirely depends on what class you plan or what faction you plan on rolling.
Right.
Because the weapon you choose is pretty much entirely based on what race you are.
Yep.
Because Horde side, you can do the two-handed Fury spec, which makes things like Bone Reaper's Edge amazing, and that's why I really want it, because I want to go Fury for the first time ever and join Neil in his quest for total alliance domination.
Yeah, boy.
But in the past, I was always alliance, and the weapon choices are much different. You pretty much want to go dual wielding as alliance, and in that case, you're really looking to get things like chromatically tempered sword and maybe like Maladath and offhand or something like that. I guess offhand kind of depends. There's a lot of debate on what's the best offhand all the time. But yeah, for main hand, one of the early things you're really looking to get when BWO comes out is chromatically tempered sword. Before that, maybe something like a Viscag, or even like some of the BOE epics can be pretty good starting out. Or, of course, just the Dalrins. But as far as raid goes, the first like super OP weapon you can get as a dual wielder is chromatically tempered sword, in my opinion.
Doc, and I can hear you. It sounds like you were dry retching in the background there with all that alliance love. So
I guess Thunder Fury plus play to the Windseeker, please. Did someone say that? You just can't. Like, and this sticks in my head. Like, dude, I've had one, and it's the most amazing thing ever as a tank, and it still sticks in my mind to this day. The first time I ever saw one in game, I didn't even know that it existed, and I got in a pickup UBRS group on my No Warlock back in the day, and I literally saw this guy like tanking and like, you know, might and whatever. I'm like, what the F is like, what the hell is going on? Like, there's like lightning and spitting ass everywhere. I'm like, what is this? And I click on the guy. I'm like, oh my God, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like, I need that. You know what I mean? I thought it was amazing, and hands down, no question whatsoever, that the TF, man.
Doc, and besides Thunder Fury, like say prior to getting through Molten Core, is there any one item that you sort of highlight as the moment where you're like, all right, now I'm rocking and rolling as a warrior. Now I feel like a warrior.
I mean, if you were looking at like as a tank, and you're kind of that it's a pre-raid item, I would say I would look at, like, you see a warrior, like, okay, he's got his Draconian Deflector. Like, that he's been around, he's getting there, he's getting ready to raid. I would say that's an iconic item that stands out that I consider like a notable, if you will. I like getting that one. And if you were to say a weapon and maybe early raid, I would say the Quellstar is one that sticks out a lot. And if you're lucky enough to get an Iron Foe, those kind of like a toss up on those, depending on, you know, what you're going after, what you personally like the best.
Oh, that's one thing I meant to ask. Now, this is a chance for all of you to educate me again, like the noob I am. I'm going to say this in full Jerry Seinfeld voice. What's the deal with Iron Foe?
That's a big Iron Foe. That is the key to getting Thunder Fury bindings. You have to have one, and you just fight the boss and proc, and then you win. That's a TBO meme. But
so I'm missing all these memes. I feel horrible. They fly over my head because I haven't played a warrior.
Yeah, it's the threat generation you get from it. With the extra swings and stuff, you get extra rage, you know, that kind of deal. And on Horde side, you get Wind Fury procs on it. How good it is, I didn't ever get one until after I had my Thunder Fury, so I couldn't say that it felt amazing because I just was like, this doesn't feel like anything compared to a TF. But at the same time, I also hear that it is supposedly heavily nerfed on the private servers. I'm not sure on that either, but that's what I've heard.
I think the problem is that no one knows the real proc rates. Like on private servers, like for instance, a Fell Striker, like people say, like, you know, it's the best, it's the pre-bis weapon, right, for rogues and, you know, maybe Fury Warriors. But like I had the Fell Striker back in vanilla and it was shit. Like it never proc. Like it proc like once per MC run. Like it was really, really bad. So, like we'll have to see once Classic drops, like what are the proc rates, and people will be able to really dig into that and see how good it is for real.
I'd like to throw in here's when I really feel like I'm starting to be a geared warrior, extra items, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So item number 1, before you're even raiding, Lionheart Helm, the iconic Lionheart Helm. you got to have that crap. It's not even really that difficult to make. You just got to have a decent amount of time and or money. Aside from that, though, before you're starting out, you can also, if you're rich at least, buy like the epic sword BOEs that drop in the open world. But anyways, after you start raiding it, when you're in Onyxia and MC, as you were asking about, I think the main items, I might just say them all really fast.
Yeah,
go. But the main items that you want from MC and Onyxia, obviously you want the Onyxia Tooth Pendant, which is from her head dropping. So that'll take a long time to get because they'll probably prioritize like tanks and stuff first for that kind of stuff. But anyways, actually another item before you even start raiding is Savage Gladiator Chain. That's another good epic from BRD Arena. But anyways, the other thing from Onyxia is Viscag, the Blood Letter. It's probably better for rogues, but Fury Warriors is pretty good too. But then there's Onslaught Girdle is one of the huge ones. Once that was in the game, that's like one of the best warrior belts to get early on in the game. And it stays the best for a while, actually. But yeah, Onslaught Girdle is amazing. Quick Strike Ring is pretty good. It's definitely better than pretty much any other ring you can get at that point. And then obviously Striker's Mark, the bow, is really good as well.
Fair enough. All right, guys. Well, look, having heard all of that, I just want to thank you so much for the vast amount of knowledge that you've dropped on us.
Oh, and Bone Reaver's Edge. Don't forget that. Sorry.
Double up on it. Yes,
that's the most overpowered item for a two-handed Fury from Ragnaros. Okay, now do your thing, Josh. Sorry.
No, all good. Thanks for tying off on that. All right, guys. Look, as I said, thanks so much for dropping all these knowledge bombs on us over the last hour and a half or so. I've really appreciated it. I know a lot of the listeners will have really got a kick out of hearing this kind of chat going so deep on a class. Now, last thing I'm going to say to you before I say goodbye is, all at the same time, if you need to, I can only presume that all of you, are you maining a warrior again for Classic?
100%.
Warriors. Can I hear a hooah? Ow! Ow!
What is your profession?
The Warriors are coming.
Warriors.
They're coming out to play.
All right, so here's the thing for me. First class I'm rolling is a mage, but that's just to be something that I farm with. And then it's definitely Warrior main. Well, if I had unlimited money to spend on accounts, I might do that, but
fair enough.
Yeah, definitely a Warrior.
Warriors for life.
Those big manly pecs previously mentioned.
All right, guys. Well, look, thank you so much for dropping by. Neil, Viv, you guys know I love you. You're always welcome back on the show. Thank you so much for racking up these Countdown to Classic appearances. And Dokken, I just want to throw a really special thank you to you. You were fantastic during this episode, and I really want to just thank you again for being so patient with me. As I told you, like, we'll get there. And here we are. We finally did it, and I'd love to have you back again sometime if we dive a bit deeper. Maybe in the protection rating chat we might have later down the line.
Absolutely, man. I was ecstatic to be here. I had a great time, and thank you very much for considering asking me to be here.
My pleasure. All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks a bunch, Josh. It's been fun.
#soulmates.
#soulmates, definitely. Oh, and we can add Dokken in the three-way soulmate action as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can all get matching tattoos. All right, thanks, guys. I got to check in on the next call. I'll speak to you later.
Later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi everyone, Josh here. I just want to take a quick moment to remind you that while Countdown to Classic will always be a podcast you can get for free, if you do happen to really enjoy the show and find yourself always coming back for more, then please do check out the show's Patreon page to see how you can help keep the lights on at Countdown to Classic and even vote on show content as the show continues to bring you more and more Classic WoW goodness. Alternatively, if monthly subscriptions aren't your thing, you can always visit the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi, with that link being in the show notes and on the website too. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, we've got another Countdown to Classic listener on the line, and yet again, a second-time caller. It's not your first time. Voiquora, thank you so much for calling in.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Now, you just hit me up, obviously I'm streaming today, and you hit me up in Stream Chat and then PM'd me in Discord and said that there's a topic that you'd love to hit on. And that was a quick chat about the Classic community and the content that we get and other content creators. So I'll let you lead it off. What did you want to discuss with that stuff?
Yeah, I was playing on the, which server am I? I'm on Dalaran private server, and I was listening to Asmongold's reaction video. It was reaction video to the Method is Ruining WoW forum post.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some other guy, I can check, who was it? He was agreeing the forum post, and Asmongold was against it.
Yep.
Yeah. And Classic talk with McConnell, yes. And shortly on Asmongold, I really don't, you're basically the only WoW content creator I'm following actively. But on Asmongold, he's knowledgeable and he's, vocal, and I really liked his What's Wrong with BFA video.
Yep.
But I somehow get a feeling like he's a realist, but he's also a bit of an elitist. Like, well, some people call him an elitist. He acknowledges that.
Right.
But he has some really, really good points. And you've had some contacts with other content creators. You were on the other podcasts lately.
Yep, that's right. So I have spoken with some other content creators in the past. Yep. And, I've been on a couple of other podcasts now. I haven't been on any other Classic podcasts, but I've been on a couple of other, podcasts around the traps, voicing my opinion on Classic for sure. But it's definitely something that, I keep tabs of other people. So I know all these people that you're talking about, definitely. So please keep going, by all means.
Did you meet any, content creators at BlizzCon?
I did meet people who create content, definitely. I didn't meet any Classic content creators. Now, as a lot of you know, I flew over to BlizzCon from Australia, was lucky enough to get a media pass and sort of did the whole BlizzCon thing for the first time, which was fantastic. And one of the things that I was keen to do definitely was start to meet people, and you see all these faces and, you hope to bump into them and all that jazz. Now, I'll tell you that, it's a strange thing because I also do get to the point where I don't feel like just because I've got a podcast, I can just run up to someone, get in their face and be like, hi, I'm Josh. Nice to meet you. Like there's some kind of brotherhood going on that gives me the right to just disturb anyone, in the middle of what they're doing. So I didn't do that. Now I can tell you that I did see Asmongold. I walked by him at one point. He had a whole bunch of people around him, about 5 or 6 guys standing outside of the convention center. And, my girlfriend pointed out like, oh, hey, there's Asmongold. And I looked over and said, oh yeah. And, that was one of those situations where it was like, he was clearly talking to people and there was a whole bunch of them. I didn't feel the need to walk up and butt in and go like, oh, hi, Asmongold. I'm Josh. I've seen your videos. I appreciate what you're doing or whatever. So I let him be. I'm sure he's got a million fucking people that go up and say hello. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's the point of BlizzCon, is to basically introduce yourself to these people and meet the fans. I'm sure, at some point I'm sure he's okay with that as well, saying hello to people and getting amongst it. But there's got to be a point where, I don't want to just slather on and be yet another person who's like, hi, Asmon. So I just let him be. Now, there were other content. I mean, I would have loved to have said hi, but, it's all well and good. Is there anything else that you're wondering in terms of, you mentioned that you do listen to Asmon every now and again. I've definitely, like I said, I obviously know Asmongold. I watch his videos as well. I consume just as much, content as you guys do, as research for the show. I try to get on top of as many voices as I can who are weighing in on Classic. And I'm with you. I enjoy some of Asmon's videos where he goes, there's ones that he puts up where it's pretty much just him, not on stream, just talking into a camera, giving maybe a half an hour take on an issue that I have actually really enjoyed. Those are really, really insightful videos. videos, and they really helped shape my opinion of Asmund a little bit. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a diehard Asmund fan. I enjoy some of Asmund's takes, I really do, and I watch his stream when I can. But there are some moments where, and it's not sort of anything against Asmund, it's just that some of his material is more directed towards a crowd that I'm not necessarily a part of, demographic-wise. You know, I'm a little bit older. You know, I'm turning 36 soon. There's just certain portions of his stream where it's like, it's just not really for me, and I might go watch someone else, which is fair enough, horses for courses. But in saying that, when he does really sit down and cast his mind to one particular topic and doesn't have sort of Twitch chat going off in the background, which must be very distracting, and he just has the time to give a viewpoint on something, I've really enjoyed those videos, and that has really warmed me to him as a content creator. So I really will, you know, people feel a certain way about Asmongold. He can be somewhat of a divisive character within the community. I think people are more pro him than against him. Now, as I say, I don't fly the flag, but I have had moments where I find myself nodding along to his points, going, yeah, this guy does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I'd like to point out, just so you know, disclaimer that I don't want to, any of this isn't for, you know, like drama or anything.
Oh, yeah, no.
I really respect the Discord and, you know, your podcast, because I think, maybe it's because of your age or the age of your viewers or the style or whatever, but Countdown to Classic has been surprisingly drama free, you know, if you know, get what I mean.
Oh, no, absolutely. And look, that's not by accident. That is by design, you know. Now, I really do try to keep drama away from the show. But in saying that, I've always been of the opinion that I'm not afraid to talk about what other content creators are doing. It doesn't come up very often on the show, but it has come up. You've all heard the episodes. You've had moments where I've played back quotes from some of the other podcasts, from some of the other streams that you might be watching. And then I'll obviously give my take. That's not a new concept. You know, streamers do it all the time. They'll play someone's YouTube video, and then they'll be like, you know, as you say, the reaction videos, and then you get the meme that is the reaction to the reaction video, and so forth and so forth, and we fall down that rabbit hole. Now, I am not, nor will I ever be afraid to talk about someone else's opinion and then give my own comment on that. I have, you know, been told in the past, some people might not be aware that, you know, whether it rubbed people the wrong way, someone has said like, hey, you know, I've heard from a content creator like, hey, stop talking about us. But, you know, like I said, I don't do it in an overly nasty way at all. And I've got no problems with bringing up people's names and commenting on what they say, because quite frankly, my opinion will always be, if you have put yourself out there as a community figure and you have vaulted yourself into a role, whether it's unwillingly or not, that you will now be getting, you know, sort of quite popular in thousands or tens of thousands of views, and people know who you are, and all of a sudden your word carries a certain amount of weight. You know, it's kind of it's something that should be balanced delicately, because it's the argument that comes up with athletes, professional athletes a lot, where they say, hey, some of them will be like, I am not a role model. That's not what I signed up for. When I put my name on that contract, I didn't sign up to be your kid's hero. So I can do whatever the hell I want. I'm going to be myself, and you shouldn't hold that against me. Now, that's fine. Some people can be like that. But what they might have to understand is that still, you are a public figure. When you speak, whether it's right or wrong, people will be listening, and people will then take on board what you're saying and maybe comment against that or for that. So your words carry a certain amount of weight within the community. So I think it's wrong to say, hey, just because I'm talking on stream or I'm talking on a YouTube video, you shouldn't comment on that. That's not fair. Well, it's kind of open game in my mind, as long as it's done, you know, in a fair fashion. You know, you don't take people out of context. You don't just sort of grab quotes that prove your point that is blatantly, you know, done the wrong way with a bit of editing magic. I'm not on board with that. And I think I've been pretty fair in the past. So I hope that sort of gives you a little bit of my opinion on how I feel about the community. I think it's a great community. The content creators do an amazing job. I don't agree with all their points. There are a lot of points I strongly disagree with, and you know, at times I might say so in the Discord, at times I might say so on the show. But I love and consume all this stuff just as much as you. People say to me, "Hey, did you see the Tibbs video? Hey, did you see the Stay Safe video?" And the answer is yes. I fucking saw it. I see them all. all. So, even though I'm busy on the show, it's important to me to keep abreast of that stuff as well. So, I mean, is there stuff that you gravitate towards?
Well, basically, my most, used mediums are Reddit and Twitter. So whatever there's on, and the Discord. And actually, funny thing you said about Asmongold reactions. There was an Asmongold reaction to someone calling him out as using Classic as just for views in one of your podcasts. It was some caller, not sure who.
Yeah, that was the first ever call I took, and I remember Asmon played that on stream when the show was very, very new. I think it was around episode, I want to say like episode, 15, 18, something like that.
Yeah, it was pretty early.
They weren't overly venomous about Asmon. They just dropped the comment that they didn't.
Yeah, not really.
Yeah, they didn't think he was, I think their quote was, I don't think he's that great of a player. And Asmon took a bit of issue with that comment from that person.
Was it though? Because I just, personally, I remember it being something about, he said people like Asmongold are all Classic just because it's the hot shit right now.
Yes, no, he did.
It was something like that it was.
Yes, he definitely went on to say that as well, for sure. I think the one comment that piqued Asmongold's interest was the having a go at his skill level. I think he didn't particularly like that.
Yeah.
And then from there,
bet that's something that he would get pissed about.
Yeah, and then from there, the caller went on to say that, maybe he's just diving into Classic because it'll be the flavor of the month, and that was their opinion and what have you. I don't, necessarily subscribe to that, but as I say, I'll voice anyone's opinion. I don't care. I think all angles should be talked about. There's nothing that you should be afraid of voicing. But Asmon disagreed with that, and it was, what, I got a kick out of being played on his stream. So it was a bit of fun for me.
Yeah.
The biggest thing for me is that I think it's important that more and more people start trying to create content, for all the Alex Sensuals out there, for all the Tips Out Babies, for all the S-Fans, for all the Stay Safe, for all the Asmongolds, blah, 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 blah. It's important that we get more and more people giving this a go. I think we should be having more voices out there, and I don't want to get to a situation, and please believe me when I say this, I'm part of this as well. I'm having a slight dig at myself as well. I would love to see more Classic podcasts. The reason being, it shouldn't just be one voice to rule them all, one voice to bind them, if you know what I mean. Like, I want to hear opposing views, and that was the whole point of Countdown to Classic, is I brought up opposing views so that it's not just a circle jerk of agreeance on a show. And I personally hate hearing that. I hate hearing 3, 4, 5 people just nod their heads and go, yeah, on every topic. It's fun to have someone dissent. So what I'm saying is taking the mantle of dissent is important, and not just being, Blizzard's infallible and Classic is infallible and everything's so great, and then getting 3 talking heads on a show or 4 talking heads on a show that might always agree on the same topic. That doesn't necessarily happen all the time with the content we get, but it is prone to happening at times. And I just think it's important to get more voices in the mix so that we can hear a variety of opinions and make our own minds up.
Yes. And that's you kind of processing on that. I think part of why your show is so calm, so to speak, it's because Asmongold, he has strong opinions, and he's a good player. I presume he's a good player, at least better than average, and he plays retail. You are this is not a negative word.
No, I'm a terrible player. You can say
it. Yes, you're a casual player, as am I, and you don't play retail, but I don't think you've ever have you ever said that you really don't, you personally don't really compare retail with Classic? You don't say transmog is a bad thing, like I could, but on Asmongold and maybe S-Fan, and it's on Twitch channels, it's a cult of personality, but you are not you're not someone's Jesus, I think, but Asmongold may be the top authority who this and that is wrong in retail, this and this is better in Classic, and this and this spec is viable, this and this isn't. You bring out other people who are more knowledgeable, but you also keep good balance. on the content,
I haven't attacked retail really heavily on the show. I keep it separate. They're different games.
Yeah, I don't think you have. And I'm not like, slobbing on a knob, but, I'm just analyzing.
I was going to say, we'll keep the circle jerk of me to a minimum. But
no, but, on the Discord chats and all, I've been, with 7 Winters, call out 7 Winters, hi. There's been the 7th Den and all that. It's been a really, healthy conversation. Really. It's been really healthy and, on point and, healthy. I say it's been healthy.
I agree. And I think the one thing, what I'm still planning to do on the show, and it'll be something I'll have to very delicately balance, but I still want to do more debates. And one of the debates that I'm planning is a retail versus classic debate, 3-on-3, just like you got with the changes versus no changes. Now, yes, I hear you sort of, moan a little bit about that one. That could get slightly nasty, but I don't think it has to. I think you get the right people, you get passionate people who can just say, I hear your point, but I disagree and here's why. It might get more fiery than other debates, but I think it could still be done with the right sort of level of etiquette and tact, if you will. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. I haven't attacked retail on the show, but that will be the one episode where I'm not going to attack retail, but it will bring up issues that we can discuss.
That's totally fine. Personally, I think, at least personally, I don't really anymore. Maybe earlier, but anymore I don't really compare classic and retail because I've tried retail, the trial version. I haven't been subbed, I admit, but it just the first feeling and everything. It just feels like a totally another game. I really can't compare them. And,
I agree.
Stuff like what Asmongold says. What they were talking about. Things a rating on classic and retail, and he said that nothing on classic is as hard as on retail. And I have a brother who actively plays retail and raids, and the stuff that's on Mythic and Mythic Plus levels, it sounds really like insane.
Yeah,
and I really believe that. And part of why it was harder in classic, it was more tedium is a word often used. But the design philosophy was a lot different. And those are like things like that go so deep that you really can't, they're hard to compare. Maybe I'll leave this to someone who knows better. But
no, it's all right. I hear what you're saying.
My point being, they are really hard to compare with each other anymore.
Yeah.
Because of all the things that have happened and the design principles changing and maybe modern players wanting something different. And personally, I think that retail is a good game. It has issues and it has a lot of things that I personally don't like to have in games that I play. I really don't want to shit on anyone playing retail. Retail probably is a really good game for someone. And classic is a really good game for me.
I agree with you, and I think you're right in that they're quite different now, and it really is become very close to pretty much the apples to oranges comparison now when we talk about retail versus classic. I mean, we go with, look, what are they common? Well, apples and oranges. Well, yeah, okay, they're both fruit, but they're very different. Retail, classic, they're both MMOs, but they're very different.
They're both MMOs, yeah.
Yeah, it's fine to be different, but like, just finishing up on the Asmongold point as well, and this isn't, like I say, I disagree with him at times, so please don't view this as giving Asmongold the proverbial virtual hand job. But his BFA video that obviously was so popular and resonated with a lot of people, I really enjoyed that as well. Even though I don't play retail, he hit on a lot of points that, even though I'm not experiencing these issues and the criticism that flows from them, it's still like it showed a measure of level-headedness and thinking points that Blizzard should perhaps take on board. And I think we're going to have the same instances that come up in Classic, where videos like that are maybe going to have to come up at some point when we consider things like,
absolutely,
when we have those conversations about stuff like sharding and loot trading and whatever is to come in the future. It takes content creators like that to make Blizzard aware that, when you see them getting, 500,000, 1 million views, whatever it might be, like, holy shit, people care about this. And here's someone who's actually level-headed, putting the point forward and making a voice for the community. So that's why I want more people creating content, so more of those voices get heard and you have more more chances of someone hitting it big who can really make people sit up and take notice. And I hope that, there's more YouTube stars that come along for Classic that we can tune in for. That's where I hope we head in the future. But look, other content creators that I saw, I said hello very, very briefly to Tips Out, and it literally was pretty much just hello. I saw S-Fand and Stay Safe. They were on their way somewhere. I don't even know if they noticed me. So I was in the middle of doing something and I didn't run up and say hello to them, because that was during the moment when, if you listen to the show, I was freaking out and trying to figure out whether or not I was going to be allowed into that media Q&A panel. So I had a million things on my mind when those guys walked by, and I was not in the right headspace to be running up and saying hello. So that was actually the only time I saw them. So actually, no, that's a lie. The first night of BlizzCon, I saw Stay Safe and Tips walk into the Hilton lobby bar, and I think Stay Safe was streaming, and they walked in, did a lap for about a minute, and then walked out, and I didn't see them again. So that was my interaction with Classic Cast throughout the duration of BlizzCon. I virtually didn't see them. So no, I didn't meet those guys outside of, like I said, a very brief hello to Tips. Then flowing on from that, other content creators, I met a whole bunch of content creators that, Classic fans might not be aware of. I met some lovely people, particularly on the last night. I got drunk with a whole bunch of them. Jason from the Starting Zone, who's actually hopefully calling in today as well. Actually, I've got to check with him, because he was going to call in and talk about the correlation between World of Warcraft and heavy metal music, which I thought would be a really fun call. I also met Jocelyn from the Angry Chicken podcast, which a lot of you are familiar with if you play Hearthstone, and she was an absolute delight. She moderated the Warcraft panel that I was on for World of Podcasts. I did a podcast with her and her co-host Manny yesterday for Azeroth, the podcast that they do together about World of Warcraft. And I also met Leviathan from he does a Diablo podcast, and I'm feeling bad because I've forgotten the name of it, something beginning with an H. Oh God, now Stephen's going to kill me when he comes on the show, because he also is going to call into Countdown to Classic about some Diablo reactions from BlizzCon, which I think will be great to hear, even though it's a Classic podcast, just to get a quick take on the Diablo fiasco, because so many people play Classic and play Diablo. I thought that would be fun. Now, outside of that, other content creators, who did I see? Bumped into Jesse Cox, which was fantastic. My girlfriend's a huge fan. We got a handshake and a photo op out of him. Bumped into Krendor randomly out the front of the convention. He was with his girlfriend, and again, my girlfriend's a really big fan of his, so we got a photo with him. And I think that's about it. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Like, basically, if you go to BlizzCon, you will see these people. It's not like they are, now you don't see them that frequently. It's sort of when the sun goes down, I did notice that when you're at the lobby bar and when you're out drinking and partying, you don't really see the streamers as much. They obviously go off and probably have their either private parties or do their own thing where maybe they won't have a million people sort of running up to them. But during the day, you definitely do spot them. I'll end it with that. Thanks so much for calling in, Voikora. It's a pleasure to talk to you again, and we'll have to speak to you again sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Been a blast.
Hi everyone. Did you know that the vast majority of callers that you hear on Countdown to Classic are residents of the Countdown to Classic Discord? Please do come and check us out. Outside of that, if you want to hear more from me, then follow me on Twitter at Counts2Classic with the number 2. I've also started streaming regularly, and you can find me on Twitch at Countdown to Classic. So please do come hang out and have some fun over there. If you want to call into the show, give feedback, or submit a memory lane or anger management of your own, then email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. Now, let's get back to the show. Next on the show, it's been quite a while since the show took a trip through the forums, something which was the show's bread and butter to begin with as the audience was building up and before we had a lot of willing callers. We've obviously featured listener calls more and more lately, where you can actually hear from the people writing the posts that you find online. However, Obviously not everyone is available or necessarily willing to come on the show to have their say, and thus we still look to the forums for a variety of opinions and to gauge the pulse of the community on everything and anything classic. So with that in mind, let's get into it with a long overdue edition of Forum and Fauna. Today on Forum and Fauna, we'll just be covering one topic, and for each Forum and Fauna topic, I reach out to the patrons of Countdown to Classic to vote on what they want to hear about from 3 options that I give them. And this week, they voted for a chat about dishonourable kills. Now, I've trawled through the WoW Classic subreddit for arguments both for and against dishonourable kills, and I'll throw in a little extra short commentary after each post. If you're not familiar, what we do here in Forum and Fauna is argue for both sides of the coin, so everyone can leave with some food for thought about their opinions. Now, some of these posts are long, everyone, and can take up to 2 to 3 minutes to get through, so bear with me as I read these out, but there are some great posts here. So I'll kick us off with an anti-dishonourable kill point from user Nubish, that's Gnubbish, who tells us this. What are dishonourable kills? It's like an honourable kill, but it's received when you or someone in your party/raid kills an NPC classified as a civilian, such as a quest giver or a vendor. Upon receiving a dishonourable kill, your PvP rank progress is instantly reduced, which means you have to spend much longer farming battlegrounds until you get to your rank goal. Dishonourable kills were added to the game to prevent people from corpse camping quest givers or auction masters, which could potentially shut down a questing area. Why are dishonourable kills a problem? Well, with such a severe punishment for killing civilians, when dishonourable kills are in the game, it's no longer possible for serious PvPers to join into groups with strangers to do some world PvP. If someone in your group decides to start killing civilians, then everybody will suffer for it. In retail vanilla, players noticed a drastic reduction in city raids and world PvP as a direct result of the addition of dishonourable kills. City raids are, to me and to many other vanilla players, an integral part of the game. They are a lot of fun and really give you the feeling of being at war with the other faction. Another factor that highlights the bad design of dishonourable kills is the fact that most people on the server don't care about amassing dishonourable kills. Someone who doesn't care about his PvP rank can just endlessly kill civilians without any punishment at all. Same goes for someone who already finished his PvP rank grind. When the Burning Crusade arrived and removed dishonourable kills from the game, we didn't see a massive increase in quest giver griefing. This means that this kind of griefing isn't a big problem anymore. You don't see it on retail either. It's silly to assume that it's going to be such a massive problem on retail that we need to add dishonourable kills to prevent it. So what's the alternative? This is not an easy question, but if we are talking about PvP servers, I would argue that this kind of gameplay disruption is to be expected. If someone is killing your quest giver, you can either wait for him to get bored, go to another zone, or make your own ganking squad and fight back. If quest givers are being corpse camped every single day in a lot of different zones to completely stop players from leveling, then mass reports and griefing bans are a possible answer. You could also make quest givers unkillable, but this is problematic because in a city some quest givers will call for guards to attack invaders. As a city raider, I should be able to kill the civilians to prevent them from spawning guards over and over. For PvE servers, I see no problems with keeping dishonourable kills in the game. If you play on a PvE server, you can't expect to do city raids or large-scale outdoor PvE. Seems fair to me. So what about the essence of vanilla? No changes. As I said earlier, dishonourable kills were not in the game when it launched, nor were they added at the same time as the PvP system was implemented. This is why the harmful effects they had on the game were so noticeable. Players had enjoyed raiding cities and doing large-scale world PvP, but suddenly they were no longer able to, which is to say that removing dishonourable kills makes the game more like its original form, and it's hard to argue against making changes to allow city raids in a world of Warcraft. So, after hearing that post, many of us are familiar with what dishonourable kills are. One of the frequent comments that I saw in the threads that I browsed were that many players simply seemed confused over exactly how dishonourable kills worked. There was a belief amongst many that ganking lobbies would accrue dishonourable kills as well. However, that most certainly was not the case. People could gank away with impunity. It was simply the taking down of opposing faction NPCs classified as civilians, which wasn't all of them, mind you, that would result in a dishonourable kill. These dishonourable kills were viewed as crippling to players who were pushing hard on their way to high PvP ranks, which is something that I'd often been somewhat dismissive on when I knew nothing about anything, thinking, come on, surely they can overcome a few dishonourable kills in one battleground afterwards. But that's not quite how it worked, and racking up simply one dishonourable kill for a high ranker could set them back quite a bit of progress. But now that we know the deal, it's clear that this first poster is saying that the dishonourable kill system, which we had from patch 1.5 to patch 2.0.1, actually wound up as an active roadblock to rankers, who may have wanted to also enjoy city raids and world PvP skirmishes around NPCs. Punishing those players so badly locked off one of the more fun things that players who got involved in PvP could do within the game. And besides, as they say, dishonourable kills are going to happen anyway, as there are perhaps a shitload more players who don't care about ranking than who do, and to them, the punishment is a completely moot point. Oh, I can't get to rank 2 in PvP, but I get to have hours of fun raiding towns and killing quest givers so the opposite faction can't turn in their quests? Lol, I don't care. Sign me up. It would be naive to think that a number of those players don't exist. They're out there, and they don't care about your dishonourable kill system. So why not simply just scrap it if the griefing is coming either way? Also, it's right here in the name. Again, World of Warcraft. City raiding makes the war more real and interactive, and is a playstyle that should be actively encouraged in a game based on two factions being at war with each other. Although after Minoru's call last week, that's perhaps up in the air. But one final point on this opening post. They also mentioned the somewhat important distinction between the effect that this would have on a PvE server as opposed to a PvP server. I actually disagree with the poster here, but if anyone feels I'm in the wrong, then please do let me know, as I'm happy to be shouted down. But I feel that city raiding absolutely happened on PvE servers back in the day, and some of those people would have been absolutely trying to rank through battlegrounds as well at the time. So to suggest that you could keep dishonourable kills on a PvE server but remove them from PvP servers because the PvE servers aren't really doing the thing that results in a dishonourable kill anyway, or that it doesn't have the same effect on them, is a position that kind of throws PvE players under the bus a bit. I've no doubt a number of PvE players organised raids and decided to have a crack at Stormwind or Orgrimmar when looking for something fun or a bit different to do. Those players may also have been the same ones who enjoyed ranking through battlegrounds, so they shouldn't have the same rules in effect. And also, if apparently no one is doing it, why not just leave it in? It just seemed a bit of an odd one. But anyway, we'll move on to the pro-dishonourable kill argument with user Scoop, who tells us this. There was a patch or hotfix at one point that made it so members of your raid or party who killed an NPC that gave negative faction would no longer affect you unless you were also on the mob's threat table, meaning you had either hit the mob yourself or healed the person who hit the mob. That change also affected dishonourable kills. In fact, for most of the live game, it was extremely hard to accidentally get a dishonourable kill. Very few NPCs were tagged as civilians, mostly in very low-level areas or escort NPCs, and the ones that were would never engage in combat unless struck by a player, although they would call NPC guards if you got near them. I participated in a lot of city raids and quest hub attacks, and played with a lot of hardcore PvPers, several of whom got rank 14 eventually, one of whom celebrated by immediately going to Red Ridge to stir shit up. None of them had any accidental dishonourable kills. None of them were afraid to raid cities or quest hubs due to dishonourable kills. The idea of people accidentally getting them all the time and them discouraging world PvP simply wasn't true for most players at the time. Civilians were always obvious and easy to avoid. You'd start shit in a quest hub and all the fruit vendors and repair vendors would run at you to attack you with the guards that spawned. The civilians didn't move. This was also a time where the majority of classes didn't have a bunch of AoE and auto-cleaving spells like they do on retail. You usually had to go out of your way to target and attack something. So, it's not like you'd accidentally tag a civilian while fighting a guard or even a player who decided to be cute and stand on top of one. You had to go out of your way to hit them. You had to do it on purpose. Every argument against having dishonourable kills in the game in this subreddit is someone saying shit like, they discourage world PvP, they ruined the game, when in reality, they basically barely had an effect on city raids and general world PvP because Blizzard was so afraid of people using them to grief or discouraging world PvP that they hardly tagged anything as civilian. There is, however, one case where they had a pretty significant impact, and that's escort quests. Before dishonourable kills were in the game, there were escort quests in some zones that you literally couldn't do because there'd always be someone killing the quest NPC. Even if you could kill the player, they'd kill the escort NPC before you could kill them. It was a huge pain in the ass. Once those were tagged as civilians, the enemy player was much more likely to just engage the player rather than kill the NPC, so you at least had a fighting chance of completing the quest if you could kill the other player. You might say, just make it so the players can't attack NPCs, but that's exactly the type of design decision that they make in modern World of Warcraft. When players can kill the NPC, but don't want to, it means that the players who will kill the NPC have an opportunity to communicate a message to the other player. It allows them to stand out as an individual within the server community. That guy's such an asshole, he'll even get a dishonourable kill to troll someone on the other faction. It creates stories. It creates drama. It's something you never see in the modern game anymore. That's what's actually lost when you take out dishonourable kills. So what this poster is saying is that the dishonourable kill system should very much so remain in effect, but not for the reasons that many seem to be against it. They say it's not actually the killing of civilians that was a problem in vanilla. It barely ever happened. You almost had to go out of your way to ensure that you killed a civilian, as when you started tearing through the opposing faction's NPCs like they were tissue paper, the civilians wouldn't actually move. They weren't coming up to you and looking for a fight, so it's not like you had to defend yourself. Now, appreciating that this is anecdotal evidence and merely one person's experience or recollection over time, it does remain the case that not a boatload of NPCs were tagged as civilians. Whilst it wasn't exactly a game of Where's Waldo with civilians in terms of their rarity, Blizzard also didn't litter the game with them. thus making it problematic for city raters to distinguish don't kill from kill. Rankers, according to this person, weren't overly afraid of getting amongst it and were good enough to easily avoid any problems. Also, and I really should look into this one a bit further as I don't want to be accused of spreading misinformation, they raised the point that Blizzard eventually noted a big issue with dishonorable kills and stopped penalizing you for a dishonorable kill if you weren't on the threat table for the mob that was killed. Now, I've looked a bit further into it just briefly, but couldn't find anything in any of the patch notes from 1.5 to 2.0.1 about that. I'm not sure if it was an undocumented change, but please do let me know if you can confirm that this happened. But let's say hypothetically that it did happen, then clearly that solves a big problem. You're not bound by the silly actions of others if you don't engage in the fight as well. So the worry that 39 other people in a raid were penalized for one person going off reservation wasn't there after this supposed hotfix. So that's something that may soothe people concerned about that. The real issue, as per the poster, is that removing dishonorable kills takes something else away. It takes away the drama and stories that make World of Warcraft, World of Warcraft. It takes away a sense of player agency in that they can decide exactly how much of a griefer they want to be. What do you want your legacy to be? Do you want to make a name for yourself as that person who lives to infuriate by going after quest givers? Like ninja looting, it may suck temporarily for that individual player, but it certainly could create a heck of a story that you won't be forgetting anytime soon. Now we go back to the anti-dishonorable kill argument from user Kippo1. The dishonorable system had nothing to do with killing World PvP. What killed World PvP was Battlegrounds. The dishonorable system was introduced in patch 1.5, which is the exact same patch when Warsong Gulch and Alterac Valley were put into the game. Now initially they didn't kill World PvP. If anything, there was more of it. At the start, you had to run to Ashenvale or the Barrens to queue for Warsong Gulch, and I remember there were constant fights and raids to the Crossroads and Astronar. But after they added Battle Masters to major cities, the raids pretty much stopped, because now everyone was queuing from their major cities and being semi-AFK while waiting for the queue. It was too much effort to fly to Astronar or the Barrens to set up a raid, while previously it was just, well, I see we have 30 people here just waiting for the queue, might as well go and raid the opposing faction for some fun while we wait. Also, oftentimes it didn't take a large raid to start a battle. Often it was just a few players who were attacking a town while waiting for a battleground queue, and then it quickly escalated from there with the opposing faction looking for revenge. But again, Battle Masters made all of this obsolete. Also, the waiting times on my server for Warsong Gulch were often at least 30 plus minutes, and a lot of the high-ranked PvP players were doing World PvP while waiting for their queues. I remember the Horde camping and fighting at the Western Plaguelands Alliance Flightmaster all the time. But by the time Arathi Basin was also in the game, I would say that those three battlegrounds had way more impact in the state of World PvP than the dishonorable kill system. Now, while I understand how dishonorable kills may seem like a bad idea, the main thing about them was to try and stop griefing. Even now on private servers, there are raids in Stormwind and Ironforge of small groups of players fighting people, as well as things like killing the opposing faction Flightmasters. Flightmasters especially have a 1 hour respawn time or something of the sorts, which makes it a pain whenever one of them dies, especially the Darnassus one. There's also constantly Horde in Lakeshire and sometimes killing off some of the quest NPCs. Now if dishonorable kills weren't in the game, I can only imagine how much worse it would be. There are a lot of bored players who just want to have some fun, and those people would do nothing but grief in low-level towns, making leveling for lower-level players an absolute nightmare. Now, personally, I don't think the downsides of the dishonorable system outweigh the positives of it. Like I said, I think Battlegrounds had way more impact in the state of World PvP. Also, there's plenty of room for World PvP still if you want to make it happen. I'm currently playing on a private server, and while I haven't seen a South Shore Shore versus Taran Mill battle yet, there's constantly small skirmishes in Lakeshire, Blackrock Mountain and Western Plaguelands, sometimes in major cities as well. Earlier today I took a mage portal to Stormwind after we were done with our UBRS run, and right after I clicked the portal and went to Stormwind, there were 20 Horde on top of me spamming AoE in the portal room. Also, a while ago I was playing on the Horde side and there was a guild in there which only focused on world PvP and large raids. These guys had so many members that they had 3 separate guilds and they constantly raided major alliance cities and towns. That was their only objective in the game. So there's lots of fun to be had if you want to create it. So there are very good points raised here by this poster as we continue to investigate whether or not world PvP actually died, and if so, who murdered it? In this post, the finger is being pointed squarely at Battlegrounds, or perhaps to be more fair to the poster, Battle Masters. Battle Masters, as many of us may be aware, were introduced to the game a little bit after Battlegrounds were. Initially, there was no quality of life feature, which had you just moseying on up to an NPC in town and enlisting for a queue for a battleground. Before that, for some months, you had to haul ass around the map to get to where the battleground was actually located in the world. Want to rack up honor kills in Warsong Gulch? Then enjoy the walk to Ashenvale or the Barrens, my friend. When Battlemasters weren't around, then players would organically form small city raids as something to do in between battlegrounds as they were in the area anyway. Hey man, this lineup to savagely beat people to death looks about 20 minutes long. Shall we go savagely beat people to death next door while we wait? Yep, great. And as far as dishonourable kills go, perhaps there were quest giver bodies everywhere even when the dishonourable kill system was in effect, and perhaps there would be even more of those bodies if the dishonourable kill system didn't exist, thus leading to even more potential griefing. However, even with this poster accepting the problems with the dishonourable kill system, they still suggest that it's somewhat of a necessary evil, with the positives standing out from the negatives. Despite the fact that it may not happen as often once battlegrounds come into effect, there are still world PvP fights out there if you go looking hard enough. Now we go back to the pro-dishonourable kill argument from user Tigerhawk, who says this: they need to do more to discourage the killing of civilians and grey players. Adding dishonourable kills for them and even increasing the penalty amount would be great. There's absolutely nothing that deters the ganking of low-level players repeatedly for the lulz. Yes, those people will only need to put up with it for X amount of time while they level. The person doing said ganking will get a hell of a kick out of it and continue the practice for months on end. After the initial rush, the tactic evolves. You're now leveling an ult. When you get ganked, you don't bother fighting back or trying. You just log out, log into your 60 and roll on over to wipe out that level 20 that dared engage in PvP when you're equal levels. You'll kill them multiple times to drive home the fact that your penis is bigger than theirs, then relog back to your ult to continue questing knowing they've moved on or are too scared of your 60 to try anything. They need to do something that penalizes and deters people from killing civilians and greys. Removing the current negative repercussions of killing them is not going to help. To address your issue with raiding cities, perhaps civilians should be changed. If they're just civilians, they have no place in even attempting to try and fight should shit hit the fan. If they're aggroed, their only instinct should be to flee, and to flee away from the bad people, not straight towards them. That should cut down on deaths because they attack you when aggroed. If you're going to run in and AoE like crazy when assaulting X town, when there's no reason to other than to inflict the maximum amount of carnage possible, well, you're going to have a few unwanted casualties. The argument of they never had dishonourable kills out at release is poppycock. And yes, the poster actually used the word poppycock. They had no battlegrounds at release. They had no stealth detection in towns, which meant stealthers could run through ganking with little consequence or worry. They had no guards in safe spot locations to catch the ranged casters that would sit on the roof, killing everyone with no NPC retaliation. Feel free to come up with an idea that gives us both what we want that is entirely different from the system that we had in vanilla though. So with this poster, we hear that not only should dishonourable kills be in the game, but Blizzard needs to do even more to deter the killing of civilians and, perhaps controversially, protect lobies. As we've stated earlier, dishonourable kills do not apply to player characters, and as a result, you are free to do all the horrible things that you wanted to do to lower level players, given that it didn't amount to something that breached TOS. And important to note there, Blizzard did not seem to qualify corpse camping as harassment, so there really kind of was an implied license to gank in vanilla with no repercussions. This poster is saying that not only should Blizzard have looked after quest-giving NPCs more by making the punishment even harsher and perhaps something more applicable to non-rankers, but they should have then started to look at ways in which to stop certain level 60 players who live their lives one shot at a time from taking a leisurely stroll down to Lakeshire or the Crossroads to mess with some lower leveling characters. Now, please holster your pitchforks and torches, people. Just remember that the opinions of Tiger Hawk do not reflect those of Countdown to Classic. But I did select the post and thought it was a mildly interesting hypothetical to consider, albeit completely, absolutely never going to happen, and nor should have ever happened in my opinion. Could you imagine a version of vanilla where you simply couldn't attack lobies or were so heavily penalized for doing so that it really made you stop and think about it? But where would one draw the line? How do we define a lobby? Is it just if you appear as a skull to them, then you shouldn't be able to attack? Do you set a 5-level limit, otherwise they're immune to your abilities? That's a whole other can of worms, but I really do think that whilst that may improve the leveling experience for the low-level players slightly, it would greatly steal something from the very essence of vanilla World of Warcraft. Knowing that a level 60, or a group of them, had gone haywire in one of your faction's questing hubs would effectively rally the troops. Now, I know it wasn't necessarily the case that the cavalry always came, but if the opposite faction decided to really be dicks, then generally the correction would be organic, as world defense channels would let people in the area know that a town was under attack, and lobies would whisper their guild or level 60 mates for reinforcements, or simply log on to their own level 60 to seek retribution. Taking away that level of community/faction warfare and general sense of fucking with each other, I think would be quite detrimental to the feeling of vanilla. Now, I know what some of you may be saying. Josh, you didn't even play on a PvP server, and you had your first world PvP fight all of a couple of months ago. How would you know? Well, you're right, but I'll tell you what I do know. A few days ago, I walked into Darkshire on a private server, and there were bodies everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. I actually didn't really notice at first as I walked into town and immediately looked for a nice safe place to park my character as I went AFK for a minute to tend to a piping hot coffee that I'd made for myself. So I stood next to the flight master and left the computer. When I came back about 2 minutes later, something was a little off. I was dead. I straight away was wondering, what the fuck? Are there mobs here that came to get me? I'm pretty sure I'm okay where I'm standing. Did anyone bring Stitches into town and he laid the smackdown near me or something? But no. There were just too many bodies laid out in too many spots around town for that to be the case. Some were skeletons as well. It was a ghost town. It was eerie walking through that many dead players on the ground. I went into the inn and it was the same there, with some quest givers lying dead on the ground as well. It was awesome. I loved seeing that, and that made me feel like I had walked into a war zone. The next day I saw the same thing in Lakeshire. I want that for Classic. Now granted, I hadn't been ganked, and maybe that's why I enjoyed the spectacle. If I were being killed in those towns incessantly by higher level players while simply trying to turn in or collect quests, then my experience may have been a touch more frustrating. And just as I had that thought, I saw some red text off in the distance in Lakeshire where I was, as I said, hanging out. Oh, I thought, this must be one of the perpetrators, if not the perp. Now, what's his name? Maybe he'll leave me alone considering I'm 19 and he's a skull. Let me see if I can make this out. I gank Lobies. Oh. Fuck it. I charged the prick anyway, and he naturally resisted and one-shotted me. The result? I see the following yelled by I gank Lobies in the area. Ha ha lol kek loktar zug zug. And with that, I had officially been introduced to Lobby ganking. It felt great. I don't want protection. I want that sense of danger. I want to be able to call out to friends to come and get my back for picking on little brother. Protecting Lobies from that carnage? Nah, that's clearly part of what makes WoW WoW for many people. But to be fair to this side of the argument, it is something that some people obviously might want to see, whether or not it's a minority of players. The poster goes on to say that the civilian system should be tinkered with, and that's something that I actually saw in a fair few posts from both pro and anti-dishonourable kill advocates. This poster actually says that removing dishonourable kills won't help. We need to burn the whole system down. Now, this is a sentiment that is appreciated by quite a few people when you browse through the forums, even amongst some of the most die-hard no changes players. Many seem to acknowledge that, well, I guess Blizz did kind of muck up the honour system on the whole, which includes honourable and dishonourable kills. So go nuts, Blizz. Maybe Classic is your chance for a do-over, although I think it's safe to say we all know that's not going to happen. This poster also says that perhaps the actions of civilians should be changed so that they don't rush to battle when aggroed. As we heard earlier, they apparently don't run in to fight with other NPCs unless actually messed with by players. Sure, that's an idea. Get them out of the way. There are plenty of other NPCs for players to wail on. Let the quest givers get out of dodge when all hell breaks loose. But again, we're kind of just wading into the waters of hypothetical land. But the good thing about that is that it promotes conversation. So if you violently agree or disagree with any of this, then please don't be shy in speaking up in the comments or on the Discord. Let's wrap things up for the pro-dishonourable kill arguments with another post for their cause. Back-to-back arguments here, which is slightly cheating, but here we go with user Spotted Cows. Removing dishonourable kills would remove all disincentive for killing off quest NPCs, making it impossible for lower level players to progress, which has a much larger impact on the player base than the existence, or lack thereof, of city raids. I'm on a private server at the moment, killing time waiting for Classic, and Surgra Darkthorn has been dead every time I've logged in for the last 3 days. Or she just wasn't spawned. I don't know, but she's not there. Not that I was overly stoked about collecting Planestrider beaks, but she is a significant source of quest experience in the Barrens, and not having her around is a serious crimp in leveling plans. I've just been avoiding playing because I don't want to start doing other quests that I would normally do concurrently with Surgra's chain. That means I'm finding other games to play instead of World of Warcraft. So this poster suggests that we have to have something there to loom over the heads of the players, whether they care about it or not, as punishment for what the game deems to be a dishonourable action. Without that, it would lead to a situation where players are logging out and playing another character, or perhaps not playing the game at all. This is obviously not in Blizzard's best interests. When players can affect the enjoyment of the game of others, causing them to move on to a competing title, that is something that will very much so draw the attention of the developer, who will likely look to shut that down in some way as soon as possible. If you keep logging in and seeing that you can't turn in that one quest, which may be one in a chain that you're really looking to complete, and the player causing you this grief isn't technically punished in some way, then it can hurt the perception of the game to the player being griefed, obviously. However, As we've touched on earlier, if you don't care about ranking, which some don't, this can still happen and be problematic. So I ask you, dear listener, what's your solution? We'll finish up on this long forum and fauna with the anti-dishonourable kill posters through user Behold the Hair, who tells us this. The number of comments that begin with serious PvPers will be in Battlegrounds anyway is incredibly disheartening and perfectly indicative of the problem. Serious PvPers shouldn't be forcibly sequestered away from the rest of the world any more than serious raiders should. But because the honor system and Battlegrounds were introduced fairly early in the game's life, they've somehow been grandfathered in, despite all but explicitly shuffling PvP off into its own little corner where it can't interact with any other part of the world. If I had my druthers, both instance Battlegrounds and the entire honor system would be scrapped, and the classic devs would have to figure out some other way to protect the leveling experience, or whatever it is they're trying to do, without effectively removing open PvP from the world. I'm well aware there's effectively zero chance of that happening, but that doesn't mean I can't still be salty about it. This is probably going to sound corny as hell, but on some level, at least to me, PvP is about freedom to play the game the way you want to. Ideally, that means city raids and massive open world battles, but it can also mean some arsehole kitted in raid gear camping a remote questing hub and anyone trying to level there who runs away at the first sign of a fair fight. And that sucks for those who have their game experience disrupted. I don't think any reasonable person would argue with that, but it's the nature of the beast. The only way to address the issue is to constrain that freedom in ways that arguably cause more problems than the ones they're meant to solve. If dealing with the lows of world PvP in the form of the relatively small percentage of shitty people, whose actions admittedly can have a disproportionate impact, means I get to enjoy the highs of city raids and massive open world battles again, it's one I'll gladly pay. Except I can't. Because PvP servers operate under the same rules as PvE, where the honor system, and dishonourable kills specifically, effectively punish anyone who enjoys world PvP for the shitty behaviour of that relatively tiny minority. Which is why, as I've said elsewhere, I honestly believe the game would be better if the different server types operated under different rules. So those of us who enjoy the messy, glorious, griefy chaos that is open world PvP can have it, while those who don't never have to deal with it. Except you still will, because as Gary Gygax taught us, you can't solve out-of-game problems, people being assholes, with in-game solutions, the honor system. Except maybe by turning your massively multiplayer online role-playing game into a multiplayer online arcade action game, which is the route Blizzard seems to have taken, and why we're all here in the first place. So now that we're done with that post, say along with me in full Braveheart voice. Freedom! The removal of dishonourable kills gives players the freedom to enjoy open world PvP as they see fit, because that's how a good MMO handles a PvP based server. It gives players the ability to shed as much blood as they want without gatekeeping how they define the term fun. Why should some people be penalized if they pay a monthly fee and choose to define fun as raiding cities and taking down a quest giver or two along the way? Perhaps camping those NPCs would qualify as a TOS breach anyway, so there's some form of policing there via reporting. But why are we pushing a percentage of the player base away from others? The fear of the penalty is real for some people. Regardless of the fact that it may be a vast minority, they should still be allowed to get in on the fun. Why are they being punished so harshly when they're clearly some of the game's more invested players, pushing ranks 12, 13 and 14? So what's the solution? Once again, just burn the whole thing down. Start again for Classic. Here's your chance, Blizz. Admit the honor system sucks and show us the big brain on bread by unveiling something that solves everyone's problems. Once again, this is a friendly reminder that the views of user Behold the Hair do not reflect those of Countdown to Classic. No, I don't think we should scrap the honor system for Classic. Bring it in, warts and all. But I do appreciate that many people hate it and have tried to think of ways to change it. Now, if you think you've designed the world's greatest PvP reward system and Blizzard won't return your letters written in blood, then please do write to me. Preferably without the blood. But let me know your suggestions and I'll read them on the show if they're amazing. Just one final note on all that regarding dishonourable kills though. It was mentioned several times that even one dishonourable kill can be crippling to rankers, but the whole time I was wondering exactly how crippling it was. Well, I found these posts from previous Countdown to Classic caller OG, and I clarified this with him, and he was cool with me mentioning this on the show. Now, the preface to these comments from OG is very much so to remember that he is strictly talking about private server data here, and that this in no way reflects what may have been in vanilla. But I'm happy to bring it up anyway. I just want to throw in that caveat for people who may get angry about that kind of stuff. So, OG tells us the following. Dishonourable kills are blown way out of proportion. A single dishonourable kill isn't even noticeable unless you're high rank, being rank 11 plus, and you're actively pushing. The only situation where a few dishonourable kills makes any difference is when you're rank 12, rank 13, and losing even a minuscule amount of rank points would force you to do an extra week of farming to hit rank 14. So if someone is dumb enough to attend an Orgrimmar/Ironforge raid while they're actively pushing rank 14, then yeah, dishonourable kills are a big deal. But for 99% of players in 99% of situations, you literally won't notice a DK. You won't even notice 2 dishonourable kills. They're so far from actually being a reason to not world PvP. I actually farmed dishonourable kills on a few characters when I was done ranking so I could have no PvP title. It took well over 1,000 dishonourable kills to get back down to rank 1, and it's weighted less at the higher ranks. Going from rank 10 to rank 9 requires a ton of dishonourable kills. Now, just remember, as I said and as OG asked me to really hammer home, that's private server information. It might be very different in Classic, and this might obviously be the case given that there was a bit of pushback on OG's points from some of the users in that same subreddit, and we had user Lord Anarchy saying this: your numbers are off somewhere. In vanilla, not a private server, I lost half a rank at rank 10 from 2 dishonourable kills. That was 2 weeks of progress for me, and I was going for rank 11. It was enough to make me completely quit the PvP grind. So, the conclusion? I'm not sure. The amount of honour you lose isn't a set figure. It's based on what's going on with your server PvP-wise at the time. So it seems like we're trying to guess at rough percentages here, but the jury seems a little out on how much they matter. I think everyone agrees though that for hardcore rankers, they set you back hours to weeks, which in either circumstance is a big bloody setback that no one would want to experience. But with all that forum and fauna done, now it's time for Memory Lane. In Memory Lane, Countdown to Classic reaches out to you, the listeners, to submit your funniest or fondest memories from back in the day or on private servers. And today we start with listener Bazell, who tells us this. Way back in early vanilla, I often ran dungeons with my cousin, who was a rogue. In order to stop people from rolling on stupid things, I always ran Master Looter on our runs. One day, during a UBRS run, my cousin won a roll, so I looted the item to him. I didn't see the item show up on my loot log, so I asked him if he had received the item. He had confirmed he did in fact receive the item, and I was curious how a looted item didn't show up on a loot log. After I asked him where he was and what he was doing, he told me he had to AFK earlier for a moment and was stealthed. I also noticed he was too far back to be on the minimap. I thought to myself, so a rogue stealthed and off the minimap screen won't have loot show up in people's loot logs. I spoke to my cousin and the two of us went to a lobby dungeon to test this theory. It was successful. Loot that a stealthed rogue off-map gets doesn't show up on the party's loot log. We were young and weak-willed. We ran many more dungeons throughout vanilla, and anytime a valuable rare item dropped off trash, I quickly told my cousin to get off screen, and we looted many items with none the wiser. The best item we ended up getting was a Kroll blade. I don't know how widespread that was. I discovered it on my own, and other than my partner in crime, we didn't tell a soul, and I've never heard of that particular clever use of game mechanics from anyone else before. I wouldn't be surprised if it still works on private servers. Next we have this one from listener 7 Winters, who tells us this. My guild had been working on Nefarian, the last boss of Blackwing Lair, for weeks. The day we killed him, I almost didn't even make the raid. My school had some kind of Earth Day contest where every student in the district painted a picture or wrote an essay or something for Earth Day, and they picked one boy and one girl to win. I wrote an essay on the importance of trees and was like the only person I knew who wrote an essay. Everybody else was painting or doing something creative, but somehow I won. So there I was at City Hall, and the mayor was speaking, and there were local TV cameras there, and they were all talking about how they were going to plant a tree in my honour outside the school. I looked at the time though and realised that I was going to be late for the raid. The mayor just kept talking, and so I just walked out before they even gave me the award. I got home and was a few minutes late to the raid. I apologised and told everyone that I was busy accepting an award and that's why I was late. Everybody laughed and no one believed me. It became an ongoing joke whenever someone was late after that they too were off receiving an award. Anyways, we killed Nefarian that night. I still remember Vent exploding in cheers as he died. My guild had an after party in Ironforge and the entire server was congratulating us on our kill. It was surreal and one of my favourite memories of World of Warcraft. I don't regret my decision at all. My principal yelled at me at school the next day, but I just blamed having to leave on my parents. And next we have this one from listener Superboo. Hey Josh, I've been listening in for a couple of episodes and I completely fell in love. I really loved the show and just wanted to share a moment for memory lane with you and the listeners. I played during early Cataclysm. One of the things I love the most about World of Warcraft is how it brings people together. During my WoW days, I played mostly with my older brother, whom introduced World of Warcraft to me. Between questing, doing dungeons together, and everything in between, it was an amazing time in my life I won't ever forget. I don't really talk to my older brother anymore, but I feel like WoW Classic can bring us back. What do you think? And I really hope that it does, Superboo, so please do reach out to your brother. See if he'll play Classic with you. It's worth a shot. Go for it. Next we have this one from Nostalgia Dad, who tells us this. A co-worker, who later became my wife, told me about this awesome new game called World of Warcraft that I'd never heard of. She'd tried to describe it, but I didn't understand what she was talking about. Fast forward a couple of months and I was at a friend's house hanging out and he had just started playing WoW also. He was a level 42 Night Elf Hunter and he was showing me the game when a large cow on a giant rhino looking thing comes out of nowhere and they start battling. It was epic, and this led to a 2-hour back and forth battle for control of Ashenvale with what was probably a 20-on-20. I was absolutely blown away. Having been a strictly console gaming player, I had never encountered anything like it. I went to work the next day and told my co-worker all about it, and asked if this was the game she was talking about. She said it was, but said that was a PvP server, and that PvP was stupid because people could just kill you while you quested. I thought that sounded awesome. I wanted to be the one killing while questing. I immediately went out and bought the game. The friend of mine had apparently only been playing on an alt. His main was a troll priest, the enemy, in a large raiding guild. I followed him and absolutely fell in love with both the Horde and PvP. So much so that I hit rank 8 as a level 29 twinked troll hunter, where I held my level bracket for a few weeks. I loved ganking and world PvP though so much, that's what motivated me to finally hit 60. I'd tried my hand at a PvE server, but it just seemed so boring. 13 years later, I still remember being in awe that first night watching my friend play. That awe is what's pushing me to play PvP again. And next we hear from listener Sonata with this one. I'm from the US and was a hardcore vanilla WoW player. I started January 15th, 2005 and was on and off sometime after BC and am currently playing retail. I was on an Oceanic server at the time and joined an Aussie guild, Drop Bears. Man, I miss them lots. I would log on for our raid time every Tuesday and Thursday, which in the US was 4 AM. Yep. Anyway, we're running Blackwing Lair and we're getting ready to take down Valistraz, the Corrupt. Everyone is getting their buffs and potions up, and in comes my dad, who also plays WoW. How awesome is that? Who comes over to tell me he wants to show me something in World of Warcraft. As I'm letting him take over my mouse, I accidentally right-click my mouse, and being a hunter at the time, an arrow flies from my bow directly into Valistraz, and I wipe the whole raid. I am flabbergasted. Oh no, they're going to kill me, I thought. Screams and laughter rage on over vent. Who in the world did that? I fess up, pleading for mercy that it was an accident. Some more laughter and all is forgiven. We get back again, everyone is buffing and taking their potions while my dad is showing me whatever it was that was so important. Get this, he accidentally right-clicks while using my mouse, and can you guess what happened next? I wipe the raid again. Oh god, I think. Here goes. I'm gonna get banned from the raid. Everyone is going nuts. Sonata, they yell. More laughter and screaming ensues. Our third attempt goes rather well, and we take down that pesky dragon with ease. So I guess all's well that ends well. And to that, I hope you enjoyed my trip down memory lane and laughed as hard as I did while typing my tale. What a great memory, and I will never forget. I absolutely love your podcast and can't wait till the release of Classic. Cheers. Now, that's memory lane for the day, but that's only half the memory lanes that I'm sitting on at the moment. So if you've sent one in recently, don't stress. I'll try to get to them next week, but they'll definitely get read out soon on the show. But now it's time for some quick feedback that the show has received recently. And we get this email from listener Aaron, that's spelled A-R-U-N, who says this. Hi Josh, I'm a new fan of your podcast. I'm Welsh but now live in England. The podcast is full of great stuff. I think some of the guests have been amazing and I've been blown away by some of the theory crafting, and I had to Google what that term actually meant at the time. I think my favourite episodes were the 2 economy ones, and Party Pooper was a great guest. I couldn't agree more. I took some notes. Since I played World of Warcraft, I've been to university and now I'm an economist. I always seemed to be poor in World of Warcraft, so that's definitely something I want to do differently this time. One of my favourite World of Warcraft videos are the classic World of Roguecraft trilogy. I think Mute behind those videos could be an interesting guest. I've certainly enjoyed watching those videos again. Will he be playing? Will he make more videos? And I just want to say to that, Aaron, I hope so. And also, anyone, I get this request a lot actually. Josh, how about Mute? Have you contacted Mute? Get Mute on the show. I would love to find Mute, but I haven't been able to track him down. But I haven't really, sort of torn the internet apart yet. But if anyone knows how I can contact Mute, then please do forward it on to me, and I will try to get Mute on the show, because a lot of people loved those World of Roguecraft videos, and I'll do what I can if he's still out there. Next we have this email from Daniel S., who says this. Hey Josh, I discovered your podcast right after BlizzCon and decided to give it a listen. I eagerly downloaded the latest episode, but then I paused. I was so hyped for Classic that if your podcast was good, I didn't want to miss out on any of it. I scrolled down and pressed play on the very first episode, and boy am I glad I did. Your podcast was exactly what I'd been missing, and I want to listen to the entire thing. I've been listening whenever I've had time, and now I'm at episode 15. A huge part of the game for me was leveling my professions. I was a blacksmith and a miner. Especially the mining felt so rewarding because the hunt for minerals and metals would send me to places I hadn't seen before. Sometimes nodes would appear in strings on the map leading to each other, and I would end up far away from my intended goal but feeling like the world's greatest explorer. That's also part of the reason why I loved the old quest texts and lack of direction indicators. The prime example of this for me was the quest in Westfall where you had to look for Captain Sanders' lost treasure, his bag, his belt, his shirt and a silver bar. Each stage of the quest would provide you with a clue telling you to head either east, north, south or west until you reached a landmark. Here you would have to look for some old barrel containing the next clue. I absolutely loved it. I just want to thank you so much for the work you do on the podcast. I can't wait to listen to the rest of it. Good luck with everything and cheers from Denmark. Thank you so much for that email, Daniel S. And the reason I read some of that stuff is it's always touching to hear that so many of you are absolutely tearing through the entirety of the show. Obviously, this is episode number 84. There is a lot of content there in the show now, and I'm really enjoying that some people are viewing it as somewhat of an achievement, if you will, to get through all of Countdown to Classic. There's a lot of people that aren't just picking out episodes here and there that they want to sort of listen to. They're actually going through the entire series from Woe to Go, which at this point is something like a 200-hour investment. So I appreciate that. And it's very, very touching to hear that people are actually making the slog through all of the show and listening to every minute that I've put out there. I'm really, really happy that some people are doing that. So thank you, Daniel S. But I also wanted to pick up on this. The reason I read the part about the professions was I would love to start doing some profession segments on the show. So this is a shout out to all of you who might be absolute experts on a particular profession in game. At some point, I will start taking those 20, 30-minute calls from listeners who go, "Hey Josh, I want to talk about everything and anything blacksmithing. Hey Josh, time to do leatherworking." All right, guys, I'm more than ready to start doing that. So hit me up if you'd like to call into the show about that stuff. So I also want to shout out Dimitri K because he emailed me recently asking for the exact same thing. And Dimitri, shout out to you. I'll also try to get through some of that other stuff that you suggested for the show as well. Now, that is the show for the day, everyone, and I just want to thank a few people that have donated to the show recently and show them some love. So huge thanks to Jez, Hot Takes Cold Beer, Palfurus, and everyone who has ever tipped the show over at Ko-Fi. Also, shout out to Sams and the good people at vanillafriends.com. It's a new website. Go and check it out. I do recommend it if you're one of those players who's looking to make connections with people from back in the day. Now, there's the channel on the Countdown to Classic Discord for Lost Connections. This is in a similar vein. It's a nice looking website. It's a database. You can punch in your information and try to sort of reach out to people that you may have lost hope on finding. And look, Sam's has done a great job over there with part of the design of the website. And he's a Clemson graduate, so big shout out to a fellow Tiger. And thank you so much to Sam's as well. He put an image up there on the front page of Countdown to Classic for people to perhaps, redirect some traffic this way. So Sam's, I really do appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. Also, shout out to recent patrons: Jamie, Nick, Billy, Morgan, Rowdy, Dan, Connor, Pandamaster, Anon0101, Tom, Aaron, Alexander, Michael, Morton, Nick, Alice, Tim, Torbjorn, and Callum. Thanks so much for signing up, and thanks to every single patron who has ever signed up to Countdown to Classic. I really do appreciate it. And of course, the very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classic. Shout out to Billy C, Firespit and Kitten, Flosy B, Nick B, Palfurus, Rarebit, Romani, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Valaco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. You all know that Countdown to Classic simply would not be the same without you and your support. Also, a big thank you as always to patrons Connor C, Damien A, Hurlbert, John H.C, Jamie S, Michael H, Minoru, Myrtle Banks, Randall H, Tim B, Tim S, and Zudamos. But that's it from me for the day, everyone. So, signing off from Down Under. Have a great rest of the week, everyone.